Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bondi, welcome. Congratulations on your nomination. I'm so glad that you've been nominated, as we discussed when we had the chance to meet.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to work with you as the State Attorney General for a number of years, and I'm delighted to see you here today before the committee. I look forward to your confirmation. You will be confirmed. I, too, have taken note of the number of times you have been asked about weaponization of the Department of Justice as if it was a theoretical possibility that might happen in the future. One of my colleagues on the other side said, weaponization may well occur under your tenure. We all know that weaponization has occurred like we've never seen before in American history under this administration. And I want to get even more specific. In the last 4 years, this administration has carried out an unprecedented attack and campaign against people of faith. If you look at the numbers, we've never seen anything like it before in American history. It has been one of the most disgraceful chapters in the history of the Justice Department and in the history of the FBI. And I hope that you will reverse this and do right by every American citizen, including especially people of faith. Let me give you some specifics. After the Dobbs case was decided by the Supreme Court, over 100 pregnancy care centers and over 300 churches in this country were attacked, vandalized, firebombed. Do you happen to know off the top of your head how many prosecutions Merrick Garland's Justice Department brought in those cases?
I do not, Senator.
It's a stunning number. It's 2. Hundreds of churches, hundreds of pregnancy care centers. And I might just add, these pregnancy care centers, the attacks on them, which were violent, which were gruesome, were egged on and encouraged by rhetoric from members of Congress, including members of this body, who have said that pregnancy care centers aren't real medicine, that they're not real doctors. They have legitimized these attacks. And the same thing was true of churches. And this Justice Department couldn't lift a finger to defend these Americans, but at the same time, they used legislation, a law known as the FACE Act, to prosecute at least 53 different pro-life demonstrators, including people like Mark Houck from Pennsylvania, to whom this Justice Department sent a SWAT team to his door in the early morning hours. He has, I think, 7 children. In the early morning hours, an FBI SWAT team shows up at his door to take him into custody and prosecute him. By the way, he was acquitted. This kind of outrageous, disparate treatment has to end. So here's my question to you. Will you protect churches and pregnancy care centers when they are targeted for violence, when they are targeted for intimidation, when their members or parishioners are threatened with violence or other acts of illegal behavior?
Yes, Senator.
Will you stop the disparate treatment of Americans on the basis of religious faith?
Yes, Senator.
Will you stop the deliberate persecution of pro-life Americans for nothing more than their pro-life beliefs?
Yes, Senator.
Will you ensure that nothing like the Mark Houck case happens again, that Americans do not have SWAT teams arriving on their front doors with armed weapons to terrorize their children and their spouses, only in the end, of course, to have the case lost because there was nothing to it? Will you put an end to that kind of deliberate intimidation of the good American citizens on the basis of their religious beliefs?
Yes, Senator.
I'm glad to hear you say that because we need it. We need it. Ms. Bondi, we need a new chapter at the Justice Department, and we need it quickly. And I'm glad you're committed to it. Now, I also have heard you've been asked about your comment that you thought that in some cases we need to investigate the investigators, the ones who were bad. You know, I have to say I'm glad to hear you stand by that. We need to do that. You need to do that. And I'll give you another example. I'm sure you've read about this memo, which I now hold in my hands. This memo that was developed by the FBI field office in Richmond, Virginia, 23rd January 2023, targeting Catholic parishes for spying, for recruitment of infiltrators. I mean, the memo goes on and on and on about the FBI's plans to put assets into Catholic parishes, into choirs. This is an unbelievable, unbelievable assault on Americans' First Amendment rights, and we only know of it because of a brave whistleblower who came forward and released it to us. And I will tell you, I have never been misled and lied to like I was by the current Attorney General and the now former FBI Director when they sat right where you're sitting now and told this committee, oh, we don't know anything about it. Oh, only one field office was involved. It was the single work of a single field office and a very few individuals. As it turns out, that's not true. Multiple field offices were involved. Multiple individuals were involved. Under your leadership, will you put a stop to the use of FBI or Department of Justice resources to try and recruit informants and spies into Christian churches or any church or house of worship in this country on the basis of nothing more than faith?
Of course, Senator.
Let me just say this. To our knowledge, no one who was involved in the writing and performance, execution of this memo has been disciplined or fired. Will you conduct an investigation, like you talked about, Ms. Bondi, that will get to the bottom of abuses like this? And to be clear, this is an outrageous abuse. It is an outrageous abuse. One of the worst abuses of Department of Justice and FBI authority in our history. Will you conduct an investigation to find out who signed off on this, who approved it, who advocated for it within the Department of Justice? Will you open the books on these abuses so that the American people can have confidence in their DOJ?
Senator, and I think what you're talking about is the ultimate weaponization, what we've been discussing all day. If I am confirmed as Attorney General, one of the first things I will do, there'll be many, but I will personally read that memo, and if Mr. Patel is confirmed, discuss it with him right away.
Fantastic. And will you work with this committee and our relevant subcommittees? I'm going to chair a subcommittee called the Crime and Terrorism Committee. We're going to do our own investigation into what happened here at the FBI and the DOJ. Will you work with us as you discover the nature of these abuses, and as you put a stop to them, will you work with us to make sure the American people get all the facts and this never happens again?
And Senator, yes, I look forward to working with you and the Democrats. I would think this is something that we can all agree on both sides, that this should not be happening in the United States of America, and work together on it.
That's fantastic. Let me ask you one other question here in my just few seconds that are remaining. This memo targeting Catholic parishes repeatedly refers to as an expert source a group called the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, the Southern Poverty Law Center has a long history as an anti-religious group that has repeatedly gone after conservative and religious organizations, called them hate groups, called them sometimes terrorist groups. They're cited in this memo. They once infamously, the SPLC called the Family Research Council a terrorist hate group, and an armed gunman came into their lobby and opened fire. Will you put a stop to the use of the SPLC as an official source for any Department of Justice memorandum or finding?
That will be one of the first things we will look at as well, Senator, and report back to you and the committee.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Noem, welcome. Congratulations on your nomination. I'm delighted to see you here. I do notice the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is over your shoulder there. I'd have to question your judgment about who your friends are based on that. The great chairman from the state of Missouri. It's fantastic to have you here. You know, the Department of Homeland Security is not particularly old, but you already have what I hope will soon be the distinction of succeeding the worst secretary in the history of the Department of Homeland Security. Alejandro Mayorkas has been an absolute disgrace to that department and frankly to this country. And I'm delighted to see you willing to step up and serve. Let me just ask you something. I repeatedly asked your predecessor when he sat where you're sitting whether the southern border was secure. And he repeatedly told me under oath, it is secure, Senator. And he repeatedly said under oath, our policies are working, Senator, meaning the Biden administration policies that, of course, gave us this devastating open border. So let me just ask you, is the southern border secure as we find it today?
Senator, no, the southern border is not secure today, but in just 3 days, we will have a new president in this country, President Donald J. Trump, and he will secure our border.
That is refreshing candor. I'm glad to hear it. Let me ask you about a young man from my state. This is Travis Wolf, who's 12 years old when he was killed just over a year ago by an illegal migrant who mowed him down, and I choose my words carefully, mowed him down in a motor vehicle, hit him head on, doing 75 and a 40, killed him. Others were severely injured. Just yesterday, a witness sitting where you are sitting today told this committee that migrant crime is, and I quote, not an actual concern. Not an actual concern. in a hearing before this committee advising us to drop the Lake and Riley Act and not focus on migrant crime. You know, in my state, with the death of people like Travis Wolf and Officer David Lee, who was assaulted and killed in St. Louis, and officers in Kansas City who have been assaulted by illegal migrants, and others who have been carjacked and stabbed, would you agree with me that migrant crime sure as heck is an actual concern and that you intend to do something about it?
Yes, Senator, absolutely. And I am so sorry about Travis and my prayers go out to his family. I can't even imagine what that is like. And thank you for telling his story, because there's so many families in this country that have that same story. And they don't understand why the federal government is allowing people to come into this country illegally and then perpetuate crimes against their people and then give them resources and shelter and food and debit cards to go take care of their families when they go to work every single day to make sure that they're providing for their families and are held accountable to when they break our laws. So,
let me ask you this. Will you work with President Trump to reinstate the Remain in Mexico program that the president had in place in his first term, which does so much to ensure that those who would seek to abuse our asylum system are not allowed into the country, and those who have legitimate asylum claims, their claims are processed in due order and in due course, but they wait in Mexico until those claims are fully processed. Will you work to reinstate that program?
yes, Senator, the president and I have talked extensively about this and will 100% partner with him to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy and make sure that it's in place.
Fantastic. I think Travis might be alive today if that policy had been in place. Let me ask you about CBP One, the phone app that I've called concierge service for illegal immigrants. I'm sure you're familiar with it. This was the Biden administration's effort to allow asylum seekers to apply ahead of time using their phones, but not actually to provide any evidence that they needed asylum. There was a newspaper report, a press report that said the only problem with the app is it never asks users, are you seeking asylum? They don't ask for any asylum evidence. They simply release these so-called asylum seekers who use the app into the country on parole. Sometimes they're never given a hearing. The Inspector General actually did a report, a full investigation report on CBP One, and found that frequently users of this app were claiming the same addresses in the United States as their intended destination, even though they didn't know each other, they weren't family connections. In other words, it has been completely abused. And the idea that the federal government would pay for this kind of concierge service for illegals, I think, is outrageous. Will you end the use of the CBP One app?
Yes, Senator, if confirmed, and I have the opportunity to be secretary on day one, CBP One will be shut down. There's data and information in there that we will preserve so that we can ensure we know who's coming into this country and who's already here that we need to go find, but also we make sure that there's another program, CHNV, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, where our federal government actually paid to fly people into this country directly from other countries without any vetting or knowing who they are. So there's several of these programs that need to be eliminated, and we need to ensure that we're following legal immigration laws.
I'm glad you just mentioned CHNV. This is this is a mass parole program. Of course, as you know, our law allows parole in only very limited circumstances. There are two circumstances, and it requires case-by-case evaluation. The present administration, soon to be gone, has granted mass parole in direct defiance of the law, not case-by-case evaluation. The CHNV program is one of those instances. Will you put a stop to this abuse of our parole law and our asylum system?
Yes, we will go back to case-by-case evaluation of these parole cases and ensure that we have more resources, if you will partner with us, to make sure that our legal immigration system is fully utilized, that we have more judges, more immigration courts, so that we can process people legally and make sure that they are going through that process rather than, like Joe Biden has done, use this as an excuse to allow people to come into our country with no consequences.
Let me ask you about another low light, not a highlight, but a low light of this last administration and DHS. Your predecessor, the current Secretary of DHS, established a disinformation board using taxpayer resources to police speech on the internet and elsewhere, to tag American citizens' viewpoints as either legitimate or not legitimate, and use the power of the state to censor them, including having them removed and perhaps penalized. This has got to be the darkest chapter, I think, in DHS's short history. He eventually withdrew the board under intense criticism, but has never fully repudiated it and never promised not to do it again. Will you pledge to us here today that under your leadership, there will never be a disinformation board or anything like it at DHS, and you will be a champion for the free speech and First Amendment rights of all Americans?
Yes, Senator, there will not be a board such as that under my leadership at the Department of Homeland Security.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you in my remaining seconds just one more thing about the Secret Service. You've mentioned this, and I'm so glad that you did. This committee, and it has been bipartisan, this committee has done bipartisan work on the attempted assassinations, or the assassination attempts, I should perhaps say, of the former president, soon to be the future president, soon to be the president, President Trump. We were stymied at every turn. And I should use the present tense. We are currently being stymied at every turn by the current Secret Service leadership and, frankly, by the leadership of DHS, who have refused to turn over documents, who refused to make people available for interviews. We finally had to pass my own law in this committee, which we unanimously adopted, a law, a statute, mind you, which would require DHS and Secret Service to turn over relevant information to us about the assassination attempts. It's unbelievable. When you come to office, to this office, I hope very soon, will you pledge to us that you will open the books on all of the facts associated and around these assassination attempts, that you will make available to us and to the public, most importantly, all the facts so that we can ensure that this never happens again and that the needed reforms in the Secret Service are put into effect?
Yeah, Senator, if I am the Secretary of Homeland Security, I will certainly work with you to build transparency and make sure the facts are shared with you and your committee. I know that you've been very frustrated by the lack of transparency from the department, and I want to thank those of you that have worked on that report that was put together on these assassination attempts. I know it was a bipartisan report and investigation that this committee conducted, and I appreciate you focusing on that, and I will work with you to get the information so that you have the truth of really what happened there and the failures so they can be fixed.
Thank you. That's a great place to end, and a high note as I see my friend Senator Blumenthal, who did fantastic work on this effort, and it will be an incredible new day, and incredibly refreshing to have a DHS secretary who will tell us the truth, who will be honest with us about the facts, honest with the American people, and who will enforce our law. And I know you'll do that, Governor Nome. I look forward to supporting your nomination. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vogt, good to see you. Congratulations on your nomination. Thank you for being willing to do this job again. You did a great job the first time around. I look forward to seeing you back in this office. Let me just ask you, one of the important functions of OMB is the role that it plays in managing procurement through the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. Would you agree with me that it is a problem? And by the way, I think 1 out of every 10 taxpayer dollars goes to federal contractors. So that's a lot of money. That's a big part of our budget. Would you agree with me that it's a problem when we are sending federal contracting dollars to entities, firms, especially consulting firms, that are simultaneously taking money from and doing business with our most lethal opponents, like China, for example? I mean, doesn't that strike you as a little strange?
That is concerning, yes, Senator.
Here's an example, prime example of this kind of behavior. McKinsey, the consulting firm. So McKinsey got, in the last year for which we had full numbers available, over $851 million worth of consulting work. They had 90 prime contracts with DOD. They got $98 million in contracts from the Army, $132 million from the Air Force, $37 million from the Navy. I think they advised on the F-35 fighter jet program and the Air Force Space and Missile Systems Center. At the same time, they had 1,000 employees in China. They were doing business directly with the Chinese government, and they advised Chinese state-owned enterprises that have now been blacklisted by our own military. Now, my view is that if they want to do business with China, I don't recommend it, but I suppose it's fine so long as it's not illegal. But I don't think they should simultaneously be getting hundreds of millions, approaching $1 billion in contracts, federal contracts, military contracts from our own government. Here's my question for you. You're going to have a lot of influence in this process through the procurement rules and process. Will you be an advocate for protecting American taxpayer dollars in this contracting process where hundreds of billions of dollars are spent every year? Will you be an advocate for protecting that and making sure it's not going to entities who are effectively double dealing and advising our enemies at the same time?
Absolutely. I'm very excited, if confirmed, getting back to being able to work with OFPP, getting a handle on the guidance that we're giving government-wide as part of the FAR Council, and to really look at what are the regulations that are in place and how can we get them better.
Great. That's great. That's fantastic. Give me a sense, just while still on the procurement topic, how you might ensure that procurement policies prioritize American-made goods and services, particularly in industries that are vital to our national security. And I just think about our experience in COVID, and you were there for the beginning, the onset of the pandemic, and when we learned that, my gosh, we couldn't, the most basic medical supplies we're importing from overseas. Our medical supply chains are so compromised in so many ways. So give me a sense, have you given some thought to how the procurement process might be used to safeguard those critical supply chains and prioritize American manufacturers?
Yeah, I think clear leadership from the director to make sure that a viewpoint from the president is implemented at the level of policy that the OFPP is reviewing. A lot of times in the management functions at OMB, they're kind of on autopilot with regard to the clear direction of the president, and using the president's management tools and his agenda to be able to drive that policy across the federal government is something that we fully intend to do, and to do it robustly. Very good. Let me shift gears just a little bit, but still thinking about federal regulations. Through OIRA, you have a lot of influence, thankfully, on the regulatory landscape and environment. I asked your predecessor in this role, the Biden administration nominee, if she would commit to the Hyde Amendment and the principle that we should not be using federal taxpayer dollars to promote abortions, which has been a bipartisan commitment, as you well know, for decades. She wouldn't commit to that. And indeed, as you know, the Biden administration pretty promptly walked back their commitment to it and has been essentially violating the law, because it is the law. They've been violating it for years now. Let me just ask you, when it comes to the Hyde Amendment, which is the law of the land, will you work to ensure that all of our rules and regulations, everything that comes across your desk, is in full compliance with the Hyde Amendment, and we are not spending federal taxpayer dollars to promote abortion in any way? As I've said, Senator, we will abide by all laws on the books. Very good. Let me ask you just a couple more things, and when it comes to the policies of life, because again, you're going to have a lot of influence over the regulatory environment. Would you agree that federal funding for family planning through Title X, through that grant program, should not include federal funding for abortion providers? Again, the president has made his views on abortion really clear throughout the campaign. I'm not going to get ahead of the president with regard to the budget process. We have submitted budgets in years past that give the Senate a sense of how he would budget, but I'm not going to get ahead of the president on that. But let me ask you this, and just to be clear, what I just asked about was the Trump policy from in his first term, but here's another one. Pregnancy resource centers, should they be able to receive federal funding through federal grants? That was the president's policy in his first term. Do you think, again, as a matter of federal rules, pregnancy resource centers ought to be eligible? Again, the president's a pro-life president. He had a very pro-life record. He had an extensive debate within the campaign at his views, and I'm not going to get ahead of him in the budget process, but I think the country has a good sense of where he is on the issues. Let me ask you just one more. The Mexico City policy, which I know you're familiar with, OIRA is very important in that policy. That's just the policy, for those keeping track at home, that says that American foreign aid dollars, tax money, shouldn't be spent on abortions overseas. President Trump championed this in his first term. Every Republican president has for decades now. Do you agree with the Mexico City policy, and would you implement it if the president directed you to? Absolutely, we'll implement anything the president's asked me to direct. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Vogt. It's great to see you again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair, I'll recognize myself. Senator Loeffler, it's great to see you. Thank you for being willing to do this job. As you and I discussed when we met in my office, I loved serving with you. You were a terrific senator, and I'm just so glad that you're willing to do this job. It's going to be a great, great service to our country. Let me just ask you a question or two to start with about the priorities at SBA. I noticed that on day one of his administration, the last president issued an executive order directing federal agencies to adopt a broad racial equity agenda. And that was particularly a focus of SBA over the last 4 years. In fact, according to one report, by far the largest program that uses racial preferences in the federal government is the 8A program run by SBA. To be eligible for it, companies had to show various racial and other characteristics in order to access funding. A federal court in Tennessee ruled it unconstitutional.
Another federal court struck down a similar requirement, also administered by SBA, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Here's my question to you. President Trump has now, thankfully, with his own executive order, said we're going to put a stop to these DEI programs. How do you see implementing that at SBA, and will you get SBA refocused on actually helping small businesses, no matter who the owner is, no matter where they are? There'll be no tipping of the scales in order to fit some bureaucrat's agenda. We're going to help those in need, get them stood up. We're going to execute on the mission of SBA. Tell us what you'll do about that.
Senator, thank you. Thank you, and I appreciate the time we spent in your office discussing these matters. Importantly, President Trump's EO overturns a divisive and illegal DEI program that was spread throughout the government, and particularly within the SBA. This will allow us to reduce the burdens on small business for costly implementation of needless programs. But moreover, I think the best way we can serve small businesses is making SBA lending available to all who qualify, as opposed to picking winners and losers and pitting Americans against one another. So you have my full commitment that we will root that out and make sure that it is broadly available to all who qualify.
That's a fantastic answer. I'm glad to hear it. And let me just ask you about another priority. While the last administration's Small Business Administration was focused on this DEI agenda, what it was not doing was helping people in rural areas of the country, like most of my state. In FY24, just to take one example, SBA made 103,000 loans. Only 12,000 of those went to rural businesses. That's just over 12%. Of SBA's $56 billion in capital last fiscal year, only $6 billion went to rural businesses. That's just 11%. There, you want to talk about inequity. There's an imbalance between urban and rural. And listen, we've got urban centers in my state as well. I'm all for small businesses in urban centers getting what they qualify for. But would you agree with me that our small businesses in rural America are extremely important? They are often the lifeblood of our communities, like the small town where I grew up, 4,000 people, relies on small businesses. What will you do to make sure that small business in rural America is a priority, that they're getting access to the funds that they qualify for, and we're doing everything we can to help these small businesses revitalize these communities?
Well, Senator, not only do I agree with you, I've lived it. I was raised in a family of fourth-generation small business. My nearest town had 600 people in it, and my high school had 8 small towns. Many of my fellow students' parents were small business owners. I saw the hard work that they did, the complexity of dealing with increased federal regulation even back then, and we have to ensure that small businesses in rural communities are getting the support they need. I understand it firsthand, and I know that we can do better, and we will do better, because this is an area that we can grow in terms of, bringing manufacturing, made in America again, can come back, driven by rural America, and paying attention to people that have been forgotten about. That's what President Trump does. He remembers the forgotten men and women working so hard in this country to make it work.
Fantastic. Well, I welcome your focus on this. I look forward to working with you. Let me ask you just about fraud and waste and abuse, and you've talked about this some. I think your answers have been very heartening. You remember, in fact, you referenced it at the height of the pandemic. Congress enacted the so-called CARES Act to provide very necessary relief to millions of Americans. We also, at the same time, created, however, a special inspector general to monitor any fraud and abuse in that program. Now, for reasons that continue to elude me, the last administration, the last president, when he came to office, almost immediately limited the remit of this special inspector general, then tried to effectively defund it. And now we find out hundreds of billions of dollars were wasted or fraudulently dispersed or not properly paid back under these programs. Would you agree with me that we need the Special Inspector General, SIGPER? We need that office to be properly funded. We need it to be given the jurisdictional authority that it deserves. Senator Ernst has a bill to make sure that SIGPER gets that jurisdictional authority. Would you support that? And can you talk to us about the need to be rooting out fraud and abuse and corruption?
Absolutely, Senator. If I'm confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee to have a higher standard of accountability, to act with more urgency, to have a zero-tolerance policy with regard to fraud, and to making taxpayers whole. We have to get back to that accountability and getting those funds back into taxpayer hands as soon as possible.
Very good. Thank you. And now I'll recognize Senator Shaheen.
Thank you. Congratulations, Senator Loeffler, on your nomination, and thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Patel, welcome. It's great to see you again. I enjoyed our conversation in my office a while back. Let me ask you this. Is it appropriate for the Federal Bureau of Investigation to attempt to recruit spies or informants into religious institutions in this country, particularly Catholic parishes? Is that appropriate?
I don't believe so, Senator.
Mr. Patel, are you familiar with the recent actions of the FBI in this regard, including this memo that I have right here, making a list of Catholic churches and parishes that they regard as potentially suspect and directing the potential recruitment of informants and other spies, let's be honest, into those parishes?
I'm familiar with that memo, Senator.
Mr. Patel, would you commit to me that you will, if you are confirmed, that you will finally and officially withdraw this memo and make it clear that this is not only unacceptable, but that it is an absolute violation of the First Amendment that every American enjoys under the Constitution of the United States?
If I'm confirmed, Senator, yes.
Will you also commit to me that you will conduct an investigation and find out who wrote this memo, who spread this memo, the field offices involved in this memo? Because I can tell you, we've had your predecessor sit right where you're sitting, and he has repeatedly lied to, there's no other word for it, lied to this committee. He told us initially that it didn't happen, that the FBI didn't make any list of churches. That's not true. We have it. A whistleblower brought forward the list for us. He said then that only one field office had worked on it. Turns out we know from another whistleblower, multiple field offices worked on it. He said that it was never posted on the internal system. It turns out it was. We believe it's still in effect. Will you find out who was involved in this gross abuse of Americans' First Amendment rights? And will you discipline them? And if you possibly can, will you fire them, Mr. Patel, consistent with department policy and law?
Senator, you have my commitment to investigate any matters such as this one that are important to Congress. I will fully utilize, if confirmed, the investigative powers of the FBI to give you the information you require and also to hold those accountable who violated the sacred trust placed in them at the FBI.
I'm glad to hear you say that, and I'm glad you use the word sacred trust, because that's exactly what it is. The FBI is the most powerful law enforcement body in this nation, arguably the most powerful law enforcement body, at least in a free nation in the world. And to have this body corrupted politically such that it is targeting people of faith in this country and then lying about it to this committee and the American people is unimaginable. I'll be honest with you. I never thought this would happen in the United States of America. I just didn't. If you had told me 5 years ago we'd be reading memos like this, I would have said, no way, that's bad fiction. In fact, it's a horrible reality. The department needs to be cleaned up, the agency does, and rights restored and protected. I'm glad to hear you say that. Let me ask you this. Do you think it is appropriate for the FBI to be sending agents, including counterterrorism agents, to the parents of children who went to school board meetings and asked about critical race theory in their schools, asked about the school's masking policy during COVID? Should those parents be treated as domestic terrorists?
Parents who have the courage to ensure their children are taught what they feel is right, and those who have the courage of their convictions to go houses of worship, in my book, will never be domestic terrorists.
I'm delighted to hear you say that. You're familiar, I am sure, with this memorandum issued by the Attorney General, the last Attorney General, Merrick Garland, directing the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to look into parents who went to these school board meetings, and we know from whistleblowers who've come forward to this committee and given us the evidence that, in fact, the FBI opened multiple cases against multiple parents across the nation, I believe, including in my home state of Missouri, another gross abuse, incredible political power brought to bear against everyday citizens. Why? Because they went to a school board meeting that they're paying for and asked about what their kids were being taught. Once again, I can't imagine, I couldn't have ever thought this would happen in the United States of America. Will you find out who was involved in this policy within the FBI, who agreed with it, who implemented it, who encouraged it? Will you find out that, Mr. Patel? Will you do an internal investigation? And will you make clear that those who supported this policy are appropriately disciplined? And will you make clear that the FBI will never do something like this again?
If confirmed and pursuant to your congressional request, absolutely, Senator.
Thank you. Let me ask you this. Do you think it's appropriate for the FBI to target people of faith particularly those who hold pro-life convictions, do you think it is appropriate for the FBI to single out and target people of faith in order to discourage the exercise of their First Amendment rights?
There can never be a targeting by law enforcement just based on their people's faiths.
And yet, under this last administration, the FBI and DOJ together brought numerous prosecutions under the FACE Act for nonviolent protests. President Trump has recently pardoned some of these folks, but it also includes individuals like Mark Houck from Philadelphia region, from Pennsylvania, who had an FBI SWAT team arrive at his door in the early hours of the morning, armed, of course, terrorizing him and his children, took him into custody. They charged him with a FACE Act violation. Why? Because he took his young son to a peaceful demonstration outside an abortion clinic. When his young son was shoved to the ground, he defended him. Mark Houck was acquitted by a jury, acquitted. Nevertheless, the FBI used their full resources, including a SWAT team, to try and terrorize him. Meanwhile, how many churches that were firebombed or pregnancy care centers that were firebombed, how many of them were protected by the last administration? Just about zero. It is an unbelievable instance of targeting. Mr. Patel, will you end this targeting? If you get to the FBI, if you are confirmed, will you end it? And will you make clear to all agency personnel that there can be no targeting on the basis of religious belief, and this will never happen again in the United States of America, at least not under your watch?
Senator, if confirmed, and it speaks to an issue we were talking about earlier, there will be no such targeting if I'm confirmed as FBI director. And the resources of the FBI, which are funded by the American taxpayer dollars, in the 7 minutes that you and I have been talking about, 2 people have died from fentanyl overdoses. 1 person has been shot to death in this country, and 3 people have been raped. The resources of the FBI will go to that mission set and that mission set alone, because America deserves a better brand of justice, and I'm going to give it to them.
Fantastic. Here's my last question for you. Do you think it's appropriate for the FBI to try and pressure the largest technology corporations in the world, the most powerful corporations in the world, social media companies? Do you think it's appropriate for the FBI to pressure them to censor the political speech of everyday American citizens to try and violate the First Amendment? Is that appropriate, do you think, Mr. Patel?
No, Senator.
Will you put an end to this, Mr. Patel, if you are confirmed at the FBI?
Senator, if confirmed, I will work with Congress to expose any corrupt activities the FBI has participated in, especially involved in the censorship of free speech.
Because we know from the court cases that have been brought across this country, and we know from the voluminous factual finding that was done, and it's in the record, that the FBI and other agencies of this government under the last administration pressured, coerced these social media companies to censor speech of everyday Americans on a range of issues, from the Hunter Biden laptop to COVID, to the Dobbs decision, you name it, they tried to censor them. The Constitution doesn't permit the government to do it. The FBI tried to get the social media companies to do it. Will you end this practice, Mr. Patel, once and for all?
Senator, I will always follow the law. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal is next. I want to say when he's done, so let's see, the 30-minute break would make it about 12:25 or something. I expect you to be back here on time, and I'm going to have Senator Lee. I'm going to go open the Senate up now. Will you chair for me? Okay, thank you. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Command, thank you for being here. Nice to see you again. Let me just say this. The last 4 years have been, in many ways, absolutely hellacious for students on our college campuses. You had the last administration which issued federal rules, binding regulations that required our college campuses to put biological men into women's locker rooms. You've had multiple universities claiming the mandate, claiming the cover of the Biden administration, forcing women to accept biological men in women's sports. And so you've seen young woman after young woman denied basic safety in their changing facilities, for heaven's sake, basic safety in their dorm rooms, not able to play college sports. Now, I'm delighted that a federal court finally struck down this Biden administration rule back in January, just over a month ago. And President Trump issued a clear, strong, unequivocal executive order saying that Title IX will be enforced according to its terms, which is Title IX protects women's sports, it protects women on college campuses, no more men in women's locker rooms. This is a huge victory for common sense and the rule of law. My question to you is this: a number of universities, including some very prominent ones that love to call themselves elite, have said they're not going to follow that executive order. They're going to keep having men in women's locker rooms. They're going to try to get men in women's sports. What can be done to ensure that these colleges comply with the law and that women are safe on campus and that women are able to play sports without men interfering?
Well, certainly, I agree with you that I was very happy to see that that those restrictions on Title IX vacated, so that we are really back to what Title IX was originally established to do, and that was to protect sexual discrimination. And women should feel safe in their locker rooms. They should feel safe in their spaces. They shouldn't have to be exposed to men undressing in front of them. I think I heard one person the other day say, well, the guys just should hold the shower curtain in front of them so that they aren't exposing themselves. I mean, really, that's just not what we should be doing. We want to make sure that Title IX, which is the law, is enforced. And we need to uphold that.
Will you investigate those universities that are not complying with Title IX, that are not complying with the president's executive order? These universities are absolutely getting federal funds from this department, the department that you're going to run if and when you are confirmed, and I believe you will be. Will you investigate those universities and give them an ultimatum? Either they need to comply with the law, they need to follow the law of Title IX, they need to follow the rules issued by this administration, your department, or no federal funding. I mean, will you make sure that that the law is enforced?
Yes, we will make sure the law is enforced.
Very good. Let me ask you about...
The senator will suspend. The committee will come to order. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from the hearing room. Members of the audience are reminded that disruptions will not be permitted while the committee conducts its business. The senator will resume.
Don't worry, Ms. McMahon, it's me, it's not you. It's all right. That effect. Let me ask you about something else that's happened on our campuses in the last 4 years, the wave of anti-Semitism that we've seen, particularly after October 7th with the attacks on Israel. Shameful attacks on Jewish students, Jewish American students, Jewish students from overseas. We have seen the most unbelievable pro-terrorist propaganda. And again, these universities taking federal money, getting federal funds, not protecting Jewish students, permitting encampments, permitting violence in some instances, attacks on students on their campuses. The president has issued an executive order on January the 29th on measures to combat anti-Semitism, and he directed the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights to open Title VI investigations into a number of universities, including Columbia, Berkeley, Northwestern. Will you enforce the law, Title VI to the hilt, and will you make sure that Jewish Americans are safe on our campuses, for heaven's sake, and these crazy students who are committing crimes, breaking windows, smashing into buildings, trapping Jewish students in libraries? Will you make sure that this stops on our college campuses that are getting all of this federal tax money?
Absolutely, or face defunding of their monies.
Very good. And let me ask you about something else. For students who have come to this country on a student visa, and as you know, that's a lot of people on our college campuses. For students who are here on a student visa, who have threatened their fellow students, threatened Jewish students, who have supported terrorist organizations, who have broken our law by trespassing or vandalism or acts of violence against Jewish students, will you see that those students, that their visas are revoked and they are sent home and they're not allowed to stay on our campuses under cover of our laws, committing crimes and threatening our own students? Will you return some common sense to our campuses in this way?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from the hearing room. I'm not sure it's going to matter, but I'm going to remind members of the audience that disruptions are not to be permitted while the committee conducts its business. Please show people the regard you would have them show yourself if you're in this role. It may seem trite, but the rudeness of people who are trying to squelch others as they're trying to communicate in an incredibly public forum is just amazing, amazingly bad. With that editorial comment, I then go to Senator Hassan.
Ms. Slater, let me give you a chance to do a little bit of talking. We are living through, it's fair to say, I think, a wave of concentration in industry. From 2005 to 2020, industry concentration increased in the United States by 50%, particularly accelerating post-COVID. Would you agree that from an antitrust perspective, this is something to be concerned about?
Senator, I haven't seen this chart before, but I have no reason to disbelieve its accuracy, and I would agree that that is a troubling number.
We've seen industry concentration in pharma, which Senator Grassley talked about. We've seen it in meat packing, which is particularly important in my state to our agricultural producers, our ranchers, and our farmers. We've seen it in other aspects of agriculture. Would you agree that concentration, it doesn't matter which industry it's in, concentration that leads to monopoly power in any industry is a cause for concern when it comes to freely operating markets? Is that fair to say?
Yes, Senator. I refer you back to my opening statement.
Yes, and that would include the tech sector. In fact, just looking at concentration in tech, the standard that the Department of Justice historically uses to measure concentration now has that concentration level as high as it has ever been in the tech sector as of 2023 in the 99th percentile. You spoke eloquently in your opening statement about the dangers to personal liberty that comes from the concentration of economic power. Why would that, is that also true in the tech sector? Is it fair to say that a concentration of power in the tech sector is also a threat to personal liberty as it would be in any other sector? Is that fair to say?
Yes, Senator. I think there are a growing number of conservatives in particular, but also Democrats who see the exercise of private power as connected to the economic power of the companies involved. I think that's a fair statement in general.
And why is it, just if you could, tell us a little bit more about why concentrations, economic concentrations in the hands of private monopolies can be a threat to personal liberties. Why is that something we should be particularly concerned about, maybe especially in this age of tech concentration?
So, as an example, the business of debanking and deplatforming in both the banking sector and the tech sector for that matter, is something that we've seen with increasing frequency in the past 5 years. I could provide some concrete examples, but I know you're aware of them, as is probably everybody in the room. And I think that a lot of people see that kind of deplatforming, that kind of debanking as a function of there being perhaps only two players in a given industry. Much easier to do that when you have a duopoly.
Yeah, in other words, if you have a concentration of market power in one or two or maybe three hands, then the agenda that the monopolist wants to pursue, whether that's an agenda related to price fixing or price gouging, or whether that's an agenda that has more of a political valence. So you were just saying, maybe they'll censor speech. Maybe they'll say, if you have particular ideological commitments, you supported President Trump, you're not welcome to bank with us. That becomes quite acute when you effectively don't have any other choices. Is that fair to say in layman's terms?
Yes, Senator, and you are far beyond a layman in antitrust terms, of course. I mean, another practical application of the kind of conduct we're describing is non-competes. This is just to depoliticize and deconflict the issue. This is a growing practice. It's of concern in many parts of the country. It prevents workers from switching jobs easily, and that's something that I think is also quite prevalent in markets that are highly concentrated.
Is there any reason to think that the concern over the concentration in tech in particular and its effect on personal liberty would be diminished in any way in the age of AI?
So we're still in the very early stages of AI, as you know. It's a nascent technology, a nascent industry. And so I wouldn't want to make that call just yet, frankly, Senator. But I think there are commentators who do see the emergence of highly concentrated markets in parts of the AI technology stack.
Well, I can tell you, I'm extremely concerned about it. I'm extremely concerned about what the emergence of AI and monopoly power in AI will mean for American consumers. Senator Blumenthal and I worked together the last 2 years on our subcommittee here as part of the Judiciary Committee, hearing from people like Sam Altman. And what we discovered is, in issue after issue, whether it is the ability of parents to protect their children's personal information, virtually impossible in the age of AI, when these companies are scooping up every piece of data and there's nothing a parent can do to stop it. Whether it is the creation of deepfake pornography, where people are able to use the technology, go get someone's picture off of the internet, a child's picture from Facebook, and then use it to create pornographic images. Nothing that a parent can do to stop it. Nothing that a victim can do to stop it. Nothing that virtually any of us can do to protect our personal data at all. And where is this power concentrated? It's in the very few hands of the people who control AI. And sometimes we hear stories about how AI is going to redound to the benefit of workers. I hope that's true, but who it's redounding to the benefit of right now, for sure, is the major technology companies, the monopolists, who largely control this sector. So let me just ask you, broadly speaking, what is it that antitrust enforcement can do when it comes to unwinding concentration to protect personal liberty?
Well, as I discussed with Senator Lee, I think one important outcome it can lead to is it can deflect the need for regulation, which, again, I liken this to antitrust as a scalpel, regulation is a sledgehammer, and I think that often will lead to, well, almost certainly will lead to more competition and freer markets, and that in turn will drive new entry and increased innovation in those markets.
You know, I think you've got this exactly right. I mean, preventing power imbalances where one or two or three monopolists or near monopolists control all of the information, they stifle competition. The real problem with that is, besides the fact it can impose increased costs and harms on consumers, there's a massive power imbalance between these companies and average, normal, working Americans. And to me, I see what you're going to do, which is very important in antitrust. Antitrust enforcement helps unwind those power concentrations and gives more power to individual Americans. And I will just say now, if you'll allow me just a moment to editorialize, you don't have to comment on this, I think it's absolutely vital that this body do everything we can to put more power back into the hands of individual Americans. You talked about how antitrust suits can be a scalpel, enforcement suits can be a scalpel. Why not put that scalpel in the hands of everyday Americans? Why not open the courtroom doors against these technology companies in particular, including these AI companies, to allow normal Americans, everyday Americans, to bring suit against them to defend their own rights in their personal information, in their children's information? That, I think, is such a common sense solution. Do you know, when Sam Altman sat where you're sitting, Ms. Slater, and I asked him about this, he said to me in all seriousness, under oath, he said, wait a minute, are you saying that we can't be sued right now? You're saying that a technology company can't be sued? And I had to walk him through the fact that, in fact, there's a massive liability shield that Congress has given these technology companies, a shield nobody else gets, special privileges nobody else gets. You talk about enshrining a group of robber barons at the expense of the American people. This has got to change. We have got to give power back to individual Americans to protect their rights. And antitrust enforcement by the U.S. government is a critical part of that. So I look forward to your work in this area. And with that, I recognize Senator Klobuchar.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hawley. As Mrs. Slater knows, you and I have worked together on a number of these antitrust issues, and I really appreciate it.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sonderling, nice to see you again. I enjoyed our
see
conversation
you.
the other day. I've been talking about a pro-worker framework for policy and legislation that I hope to advance in this Congress, doing common sense things like delivering transparency in the workforce, holding abusive employers accountable, making union elections fair and timely, getting fair and timely initial contracts when employees vote for a union, and boosting penalties for unfair treatment. You and I have talked about this some. You kindly offered in my office to work with me and provide technical feedback on the legislation and other forms of support. Are you willing to reaffirm that today and to help us as we try to advance in this Congress legislation that will protect workers along the lines that President Trump has talked about, and also strengthen our economy?
Senator, I enjoyed our conversation. I enjoy not only your passion for the workforce, but also President Trump's vision on bringing everyone together in his administration. And as we discussed, For you or any other senator, you have the full resources of the Department of Labor for any technical assistance on any part of the bills that this Congress decides that they would like to move forward or any of the senators want to sponsor. We will be there to assist you, providing technical guidance through both our political and career staff to make sure that you all can pass legislation.
Good, very good. Thank you for that. Let me ask you a little bit about artificial intelligence, which is something else that you and I discussed, and I enjoyed our conversation. You talked about your tenure at the EEOC and your role that you played helping to determine the appropriate uses for AI in hiring. What role do you think AI should play when it comes to federal hiring?
I think that we have to look at this, whether it's the federal government or the private sector, the same way. The tools that are being developed out of Silicon Valley are being used in the hiring process, not just here in the US, but across the world. And I think the US needs to obviously lead in that innovation, and we need to keep that innovation here, but how do we do that? And that's what we discussed, making sure that all these tools are designed in accordance with our longstanding laws, no matter what the use is. We talked about employment, but there's obviously a lot of different kinds of uses of artificial intelligence. And we are not going to be able to succeed as a global leader in AI without making sure that the products are developed, designed, and deployed in accordance with the laws that Congress have passed. Not new laws yet, not new government bodies, with what we have in the executive branch. And there's a lot of old laws that we can apply to this. They're not outdated. That's our job to apply.
Let me just zoom out on this a little bit and ask you more broadly. Many American workers are very concerned about losing their jobs to AI, concerns that I think are very well-founded. What's your message to American workers who feel at risk from this so-called AI revolution and think, gee, pretty soon I'm not going to have a job at all?
Well, this is a very, very important conversation, and another conversation on how we win, making sure that all workplace workers who are going to be either using these tools, subject to these tools, are not fearful that they're going to be replaced by them. And that's really working with the entire AI community, whether it's the venture capitalists, the vendors, to ensure that these products are developed, designed, and deployed with that in mind, that this is going to essentially make your job easier, better, and you could be more enjoyable and thrive more in the workplace and not having that fear of displacement. And if these tools are used to displace workers, that's a whole different conversation that we need to have before that occurs, to make sure that all protections in the workforce are built into these systems, because if they're not, then that's a part we could use law enforcement if jobs are improperly being displaced by artificial intelligence, the same way we would do if it was by humans.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that answer, and I just want to register a concern here that I've registered in other contexts, which is we hear a lot about the AI revolution and how wonderful it's going to be for workers. And I hope that that's true. And I think it should be the business of this Congress to make sure it is true, because what I am not willing to see are large amounts of jobs, or really any number of good-paying jobs, ruined, destroyed, taken by AI. We have too few good-paying blue-collar jobs in this country. I don't want an AI revolution that takes away even more of those jobs. I remember when the CEO of Microsoft not so long ago was sitting where you're sitting and testifying before a different committee of which I was a member, and he said, oh, we should love AI. It's wonderful. Soon we will automate and take away all kinds of non-creative jobs that we really don't need in this country anymore, like everyone who might work at a service restaurant, for example. We just won't need any of those people. I said to him, that's not a utopia. That sounds to me like a dystopia. That sounds to me like you're eliminating hundreds of thousands, millions of jobs that are often the way that workers get their foot in the door, they get into the labor force. So I'm glad to hear your answers. I'm glad for your work on AI. We've got to make sure that our workers are benefiting from this technology, not being ravaged and preyed upon by this technology.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bhattacharya, congratulations on your nomination. Thank you for being here. I enjoyed getting to visit with you the other day. Let me just start with the subject that you and I visited about, and that I also asked your soon-to-be boss, Robert Kennedy Jr., about when he was sitting right where you are, and that's the use of abortive fetal tissue in NIH-funded research. I asked now Secretary Kennedy directly if he would reinstate President Trump's policy that prohibits abortive fetal tissue research in NIH-funded grants. He said that he would. Let me just ask you the same to make sure we're all on the same page here. Do you support that policy? Will you prohibit the use of abortive fetal tissue
in NIH research, NIH-funded research.
Senator, I'll absolutely follow the lead of Secretary Kennedy and President Trump on this. Just very quickly, may say why it's so important that we have alternatives. Because during the pandemic, I would often be on Catholic radio, and people would ask me whether the mRNA vaccines were made or developed with fetal stem cell lines. And I had to say yes, and they had a lot of the folks who were calling in had ethical objections. In public health, we need to make sure the products of the science are ethically acceptable to everybody. And so having alternatives that are not ethically conflicted to fetal stem cell lines is not just an ethical issue, but it's a public health issue. We need to make sure that everyone is willing to take the kinds of progress that we make, and so I'm absolutely committed to that.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I think it's a tremendous point that it is not only an issue of moral principle, although it is an extremely important issue of moral principle in the first instance, but it is also a public health issue. We think about millions and millions of Americans who are understandably very concerned about the components, if you will, of many of these palliatives and vaccines, and we want them to be able to access this on the same basis as others. So thank you for making that point. Let me ask you about something else that your soon-to-be boss, Secretary Kennedy, has said recently, that he has talked about his concerns that NIH is working to advance, in some instances, big pharma's bottom line rather than the health needs and health interests of the American people. And he recently wrote in the Wall Street Journal that he wants to propose stopping NIH funding going from researchers who have conflicts of interest, who have a financial benefit with a big pharma company. Can you comment on that? Do you support that effort? And can you comment on the importance of making sure that what we're doing with our NIH funding is prioritizing the health of Americans, not the profit of any particular corporation?
Senator, I think the transparency in conflicts of interest is fundamental to trust in science, and I absolutely committed to making sure that transparency is at the center of the work supported by the NIH. I also commit, Senator, to, and I mentioned this earlier, to supporting research on products that are already off patent, that don't necessarily have a drug company behind it, but that could have potentially enormous benefit for treating chronic diseases or preventing chronic diseases. I think the NIH ought to be doing research in support of the public good, not just parochial research in support of a few companies.
Fantastic. I think that's so important to restoring the sense of credibility and trust that the American people frankly have lost in the NIH and much of our public scientific apparatus, because of the financial conflicts of interest, because of the prevalence of big pharma, but also because, and you and I discussed this as well, what happened during COVID-19. And I just want to ask you about that in my remaining moments here. I had the opportunity to question the author, or one of the co-authors of the now infamous Proximal Origin paper. Dr. Robert Gary is the individual who I had the opportunity to question. He wrote that paper on March 17th, 2020. You probably remember, Doctor, this is the paper that infamously stated, and I'm going to quote it now, that the SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a manipulated virus. Under questioning by me, Dr. Gary admitted he actually had no knowledge of that at the time. He wrote that in March of 2020. He had no evidence to suggest that was the case. This was, in fact, a piece of purist propaganda. He has since had many of his research products withdrawn from peer-reviewed journals because he hasn't followed appropriate peer-reviewed standards. This effort, this propaganda effort, and that paper, as you remember, was used as the basis of government-directed censorship to those in the scientific community, like yourself, to millions of ordinary Americans. The net effect of this was a tremendous loss in confidence by the American people in the NIH and in our public health officials. You and I have discussed the vital importance of restoring some of that credibility. Talk to us about how you see going about doing that.
Senator, that episode is a low point in the history of science. The top officials of the NIH abused their position to hide support for research that may have caused the pandemic. And I commit to making sure that all of the activities of the NIH, not just backwards, but going forward, are transparent and open to the American people and to Congress. That's vitally important for the future of the NIH and for the future of science itself.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. And now,
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Bishop, Mr. Edgar, congratulations on your nomination. Thanks for being here. It's great to see you both here. Congressman, let me start with you. The
agency that you're going to be the deputy director of, and I believe you will be confirmed. Look forward to supporting your confirmation.
Thank you, sir.
Is a key agency, as you know, and it includes, among its many components, it includes a very key component, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, OIRA. It's a mouthful.
It is.
But that little agency, that mouthful, OIRA, does a lot, as you know. It reviews basically every agency regulation, reviews it, vets it, provides recommendations on it, does cost-benefit analysis in some cases, every agency regulation that comes through the federal government. So that office is a key node in the federal government.
No doubt.
For assessing regulations. So with that in mind, I just want to ask you some questions that I also asked Director Vogt that I think are so important for those of us who are pro-life, serving in an administration that is avowedly pro-life. Just on Title 10, this is the Title 10 grant program that currently provides money under the Biden administration, has been providing money for abortion providers. Now, I talked with the Director Vogt about this. I've talked with RFK about it. RFK committed to me that he would end Title 10 funding for abortion providers. There will be a rule that will be necessary for that. My question to you is, will you be an advocate within OMB for seeing that RFK's commitment, which is also the President's commitment, is carried through, that we stop Title 10 funding for abortion providers?
Senator, as you know, my role as Deputy Director is implement the President's policy, not my own. But certainly I have taken note of what you've articulated on the subject. It has been the source of discussion. And so there's a deliberative process at OMB and OIRA that it would be inappropriate of me to get ahead of or to foretell or forecast the result of. But thank you for articulating it. It is something that I'll take back.
Good. I just want to drill down on this, though, because this is very important, and I don't think this is in doubt. The HHS Secretary, now confirmed and sitting, has said under oath that he will overturn the current rule and put back in place President Trump's rule on Title 10 funding. The President himself has said he does not support Title 10 funding going to abortion providers. So I guess another way to ask you this question is, let me put it to you this way. Do you support the President's policy, implemented into law in his first term, articulated again since then, articulated again now by his current HHS Secretary, that Title 10 funding should not flow to abortion providers? Let me ask it that way.
In my view, the purpose of OMB and my purpose as Deputy Director will be to implement the President's policy.
Okay, good. Let me ask you about the Hyde Amendment. Will you work to ensure that all federal agencies fully comply with the Hyde Amendment, which, as you know, is statutory law and has been since 1977?
OMB does play a role in ensuring consistency and observing law across the federal agencies, and so certainly, Senator, it'll be an issue we'll give attention to.
Oh, great. And that includes, just to be clear, that includes the Hyde Amendment, which is in place and has been governing law since 1977. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay, good. The Weldon Amendment. Similarly, the Weldon Amendment prevents discrimination against healthcare providers who have a conscience objections to abortion. The last administration essentially ignored it. It is the law. Again, in your position at OMB, as you review these regulations, as you advise on the implementation of the law, will you advise every component of the government to comply with the law, which includes the Weldon Amendment?
Senator, it will be my purpose as Deputy Director of OMB to comply with the law and see to it that other agencies and personnel within the federal government do so to the extent of my responsibility.
Good, and that includes the Weldon Amendment, correct, Congressman?
Yes, sir, Senator. Okay. That's part of the law. So
yes, good. It is. It is part of the law. The last administration seemed to forget this. Last thing, when it comes to pregnancy resource centers, pregnancy care centers, so important, provide, in many cases, completely free medical care to mothers, many of whom are facing an unexpected pregnancy, everything from health screenings to diapers, baby food, consultation, all, again, often completely free. The last administration conducted an incredible effort to attempt to persecute and shut down these pregnancy care centers. The President, in his first administration, allowed federal funding to be available and federal grants to pregnancy care centers. He said he wants to do that again. Here again, my question to you is, as you look at these grants, as you look at these regulations, will you be an advocate for the President's policies allowing federal funding to flow to these pregnancy care centers?
I will be an advocate for the President's policies on that subject, Senator. Good. And I would say one advantage that my service in Congress alongside you and working together with you on some things, Senator, provides is I did witness the evidence that you're describing about the official posture and neglect or hostility toward pregnancy resource centers in the past administration. And so I carry that experience with me into the role I seek to be confirmed to.
That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear you say that. And just to put a fine point on that, you know these statistics as well as I do. In the last administration, after the Dobbs decision, hundreds of pregnancy care centers were vandalized, were firebombed, were the subject of criminal activity. And while the last administration abused federal statutes to go persecute pro-lifers who demonstrated peacefully, according to their religious beliefs, they did nothing to protect pregnancy care centers. Nothing. Hung them out to dry, allowed them to be firebombed, vandalized, criminalized, and the rest. It's absolutely outrageous, all while denying them, in many cases, grants for which they qualify under federal law. So your experience on this will be important, I think, and I look forward to you being a strong advocate in the administration. I see my time has sadly expired, and as Senator Paul knows, I always adhere to my time limits. So I'll have some questions for the record for you, Mr. Edgar, and maybe a few more for you, Congressman. Again, thank you both for being here. I look forward to supporting your nominations.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I was alarmed to see yesterday that news reports that Dr. McCary had decided to elevate to the chief counsel of the FDA a lawyer from the Biden administration who has, I'm sure it would warm my colleagues' hearts on the other side of the aisle to know, repeatedly argued in favor of the Biden administration's rules on the chemical abortion drug, mifepristone, in case after case after case. This, frankly, flew in the face of what Dr. McCary told me in terms of his unbiased view on this. He said he would carry out a close review of that drug, as is required by law, by the way, and what he also testified to this committee. I subsequently learned that this same attorney whom he had chosen to be the head of, again, the FDA's chief counsel, had also repeatedly argued for President Biden's vaccine mandates and had argued that there was no imposition on religious liberty in the vaccine mandates, that there should be no exceptions, argued in favor of the government shutdowns, argued in favor of firing federal officials who refused the vaccine mandate even on religious liberty grounds. I was stunned to hear about this, and frankly, Mr. Chairman, I was very, very alarmed, and it called into question, to me, Dr. McCary's judgment. Now, I'm pleased to see that as of this morning, he has withdrawn his support from this individual. She has resigned as chief counsel at the FDA. He has reconsidered that judgment, and that gives me some confidence. On that basis, I will vote yes.
Aye. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Nice to see you. Mr. Cooper, I enjoyed our conversation the other day. Nice to see you here in person today. As the nominee to be director of OPM, you're going to play a very significant role in overseeing policies that affect federal employee programs, of course, including those related to health care and employee benefits. And I just want to get your sense, your views about pro-life policies and how they may influence your approach in this role, because it's going to be very important to what you do. Are you familiar with the Smith Amendment? Does that ring a bell?
I'm familiar vaguely, but not with specifics.
Okay, well let me, that's fine. Let me just give you a little refresher. The Smith Amendment is a longstanding pro-life provision of law since 1982 that prohibits financial services and government appropriations from being used, and here I'll just quote the statute, for an abortion or the administrative expenses in connection with any health plan under the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program, which provides any benefits or coverage for abortions, except for in cases of rape, incest, and life of the mother. That absolutely includes OPM, and it's significant because prior to the Smith Amendment's enactment, OPM administered plans, these are federal health benefit plans, funded approximately 17,000 abortions nationwide yearly. This is with taxpayer money, I want to emphasize, costing the taxpayers almost $10 million a year. Now, that was 40 years ago. So the Smith Amendment has been in effect since that time. It enacts and represents this bedrock commitment that we have that we don't use, whatever your position may be on abortion, and I'm 100% pro-life, but even if you're not, we have long agreed in this country we don't use taxpayer funding for abortions and for the administrative expenses associated with abortion. So with that background, will you commit to upholding the Smith Amendment and ensuring that OPM funds are not used in any way to support or promote or pay for abortion services?
Yes, Mr. Senator, look, if I have the opportunity to serve at OPM, I'm going to follow all of the laws and regulations, including the Smith Amendment, as you described. So good. Anything that is appropriate under the legal framework, I can assure you we'll follow.
Good, fantastic. Your predecessor in this role used her
Post to promote with a vengeance, if I might say, critical race theory, intersectionality, DEI. I mean, let me just hit a few of the highlights. This is Kiran Ahuja. While she was chief of staff for OPM during the Obama administration, she praised civil unrest in the United States, praised it as a means of finally coming to terms with our racist history as a country. While she was OPM director, she published the government-wide strategic plan to advance DEI and accessibility, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce. She created the Chief Diversity Officers Network Council. She issued guidance on gender identity, directing agencies to set internal policies and procedures on how to handle transitions, gender transitions that is, and how to support transitioning employees. That's a quote. She banned agencies from assessing salary histories before hiring because it could exacerbate pre-existing inequality. So let me just ask you, are you going to unwind all of that nonsense that the American people got a good hard look at in November, I might add, and said an emphatic no to the trans ideology, no to men in women's locker rooms, no to critical race theory and calling this country a racist country that's systemically evil and ruined and terrible? Are you going to put a stop to that in OPM and get OPM focused back again on its core mission?
Yeah, Mr. Senator, I want to make sure that we focus on how do we create a great workforce that is responsive to the needs of the people and that does so in a way that's efficient. As you well know, of course, the President has already issued executive orders with respect to the DEI departments in government, and we will fully comply with those.
Fantastic. You'll vigorously enforce those, I would assume, Mr.
Yes, Senator.
Yes, very good. Mr. Ueland, it's nice to see you again, and I've enjoyed working with you over the years. Congratulations on this nomination. Thanks for being willing to do it. And the committee has just a tremendous letter in your support from the Susan B. Anthony list and the National Right to Life Committee, talking about your longstanding commitment to the pro-life cause, to the basic principle that every child born in this country deserves to be treated with equality and fairness, welcomed and protected. And it's a tremendous letter. It's great to see a member of the administration get this kind of support from the pro-life community. If this has not already been entered into the record, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent to do so.
Without objection.
Mr. Ueland, let me just, in the remaining moments here, let me just give you an opportunity to talk about what your priorities will be. And let me say, again, congratulations to you on this nomination. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Senator. I really appreciate that. Very quickly, obviously, to serve with honor and dignity and effectuate the President's agenda. In terms of the DDM specifically, make sure that what we're doing to protect our cybersecurity, the information of taxpayers and employees, is advocated and ensured. See what we can do with newer technology and ways to help downsize, rescope, and reorient the federal government as the President has directed, and ultimately serve at the pleasure of the Director and the Deputy Director for any other duties that might be assigned to me.
Very good. Congratulations to you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Slotkin.
Congratulations to the nominees. Thank you for being here. Mr. Woodward, let me start with you. You and I had a nice chat the other day. I appreciated the visit. When we were talking about the civil division, you referenced some tightening up that you believe needed to happen, and you brought up in that context the Mifepristone case. So I just want to drill down on this for a second. 2 weeks ago or so, the Department of Justice entered and filed a motion in the Mifepristone case in the Northern District of Texas. This is a Missouri case where the state of Missouri and some others are seeking to put back in place the safety protocols for the abortion drug that existed before Joe Biden removed them. The Department of Justice attorneys from the civil division filed a motion in that case seeking to have the case dismissed. Is it your understanding that that was a mistake? What's your view of this? I mean, you raised this case to me.
Senator, thank you for the question. As you can appreciate, it is long-standing policy of the Department of Justice not to comment on pending cases. Those briefs do speak for themselves. The reason I've raised that case with you is because we were having I thought, very helpful discussion about the fact that litigation should be holistic, and that as the Department of Justice continues to litigate on behalf of the President, there's an obligation, a duty even, for us to communicate with those with whom we're litigating against. We should be personal in our litigation. We should speak to those with whom we are litigating, and we should try to come to an agreement. We don't always have to resolve our disputes in court.
Which did not happen in this case. Is that the thrust of it?
That's correct, Senator.
In other words, the Department of Justice did not work with the state of Missouri. I have to tell you, though, I'm surprised and concerned by the department's decision on the merits in this case, and I've said as much to your soon-to-be boss, the Attorney General, I frankly don't understand it. And I'm sure this case isn't going away. I mean, the Department of Justice said that they did not think venue was appropriate. So let me just ask you, if the states refile in another venue, is the department going to oppose the states on the merits? I mean, is the department actually going to defend Joe Biden's pro-abortion regulations?
Senator, thank you for the question. I have had discussions with the Attorney General about this case in my role as counselor to her presently. Of course, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on those discussions. What I can tell you, Senator, is that if confirmed, we would look very specifically at every case to have been filed by the Biden Justice Department and ensure that those cases are appropriate, and then also ensure that we are taking the right track in those cases. And so I'm happy to talk with you and your colleagues about that case and any other case if confirmed.
As you, I hope, know, before President Biden, mifepristone, the abortion drug, had long had a series of safety protocols attached to it ever since it was first offered in the United States over 20 years ago, including requirements that a physician be the one to dispense the drug, that a physician screen for ectopic pregnancies, that a physician be present to provide emergency care if necessary. President Biden removed all of these, and now the drug is available. You don't have to be a physician to prescribe it. It can be sent through the mail. Telehealth providers from foreign countries are now providing this drug. And it doesn't matter as a consequence what any state or voters in any state decide. The voters of my state, for example, any limits on the drug imposed by voters of a state consistent with the Dobbs decision is automatically overridden by what Joe Biden's FDA decided to do. So this is a matter of extreme importance. And I just point out 70% of abortions now in the United States occur because of this drug, which can now be administered totally unsupervised. Let me just ask you, are you familiar with the Ethics and Public Policy Center's recent survey of mifepristone prescriptions? 865,000 mifepristone prescriptions over a 5-year period. Have you seen that study, Mr. Woodward?
Senator, I apologize, I have not seen that study.
Well, let me just bring you up to speed. What the study shows is that over 10% of women who are prescribed this drug, again, without physician help or aid, over 10% of these women experience a serious adverse health event. That means an infection, hemorrhaging, a life-threatening event, sepsis, that leads them to go to an emergency room. That is 22 times higher than what the FDA label currently admits is the risk of a serious adverse health event. This is the largest study of mifepristone done, I think, ever. 865,000 separate prescriptions were studied. So my point is this: the safety needs are extremely real. They are pressing. The rights of the states to protect their citizenry, I think, is extremely well-founded and well-developed, by the way. I mean, they are seeking the right relief in the right courts. And I just hope that the Department of Justice will do as you were saying a moment ago. I hope the Department of Justice will work with these states and will also vindicate the rights of voters to decide these issues and the rights of states to protect their citizens. I just can't imagine why the department would want to defend the abortion regulations of Joe Biden, who was the most rabidly pro-abortion president in American history. Very different than our current president, who has been the most pro-life president in American history.
Senator, I appreciate the question. As in the wake of Dobbs, I agree. The law is quite clear. And I'm going to sound like a broken record, but the President of the United States has said time and again he will follow the orders that come down from the Supreme Court.
Let me ask you here about one other religious liberty issue. Are you familiar with Mark Houck? Does that name ring a bell? Do you know about this case, Mr. Woodward?
I'm sorry, Senator, I'm not familiar.
Well, that's all right. I think we've got a picture of Mark. Mark Houck is a pro-life demonstrator, peaceful demonstrator, a Pennsylvania man. Here he is with his family, his kids. They're at Mass there. He's a faithful Catholic. Mark Houck took one of his boys, pictured here, to an abortion center to go and walk on the streets, pray, and offer any counsel to any women who might voluntarily want to receive it, pray with them, etc. For this, he was arrested by the United States Department of Justice. They sent a SWAT team to his home in the early hours of the morning in rural Pennsylvania. They detained his children. They used the full SWAT regalia, including semi-automatic weapons, rifles, and so forth, to take him into custody. He was taken into custody. He was charged like a criminal under the FACE Act. He was acquitted by the jury, which is
truly remarkable. I want to emphasize the state of Pennsylvania had the opportunity to charge Houck. They didn't do it because they didn't think, liberals in Pennsylvania didn't charge him because they knew there wasn't a case. The Biden DOJ charged him anyway, treated him like a terrorist, and a jury acquitted him, thank the Lord. Now, Mr. Houck is suing the Department of Justice for what they did under the Biden administration. So far, DOJ is opposing his suit. Doesn't this seem like something to you that should be settled? I mean, shouldn't this man have his name cleared? I want to emphasize the jury acquitted him, but shouldn't this man have his name cleared and have DOJ admit that what the Biden administration did to him was just dead wrong?
Senator, in my practice over the last 4 years, I saw firsthand how the Biden administration weaponized the Department of Justice, and there is no place for weaponization at the Department of Justice. I can assure you that we will look at every single case, to ensure that there is no weaponization at the Department of Justice. I look forward, if confirmed, to working with Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, to Attorney General Pam Bondi. We will find those cases and we will resolve them.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. I think Mr. Houck deserves to have his name cleared. I think he deserves more than an apology for what Joe Biden did to him. He deserves recompense, he deserves restitution, and he deserves to get what you have gotten for your clients, which is an acknowledgement that what the government did to them is wrong. What the government did to him is wrong. It was flat out religious persecution, nothing but that. Joe Biden trying to send a signal to every religious believer and every pro-life believer in this country, don't you dare exercise your beliefs in public, or we might come with a SWAT team and haul you off to prison. It is a disgusting abuse of the First Amendment. Thank goodness a jury acquitted him. Now he deserves to be made whole, and I hope that you'll be part of that. I see nobody else here. Are we going to let it go? Well, they tell me that Senator Cruz is on his way, which means that I can just keep right on questioning. So what do you think, Mr. Woodward? I'm sure you're really enjoying this line of questioning. Let me ask you something different. Let me ask you about President Trump's executive order on Title IX in men and women's sports. Something you and I talked about is the need to see that the president's executive orders are enforced, that states are complying with them, that they're complying with federal law. Talk to us about the importance of his order protecting women, getting biological men out of women's sports. What does the department need to do there? What do you think is the priority? And tell us why this is so significant.
Thank you for the question, Senator. You know, this is a deeply personal issue to me. I have a 2-year-old daughter who has 3 older brothers. She can hold her own, but it's a problem. It's an issue that has to be addressed. The president has taken this head on as an important issue in his administration. The executive orders speak for themselves. And although I can't comment on pending litigation that has been brought by the Department of Justice, we have seen that the Department of Justice is enforcing the president's executive orders. To quote the president, "We'll see you in court." Don't follow the president's executive order, we'll see you in court.
And you would send that message to universities that are currently failing to comply, that are violating Title IX. I mean, to be clear, Title IX protects women's sports. Title IX creates the right of women to play in sports that have integrity, where they are protected from danger, where they are given the same opportunities as male athletes. These universities that are putting biological men into women's sports and women's locker rooms are flagrantly violating Title IX. So your message to those universities is, if you don't amend your ways, you can expect to face off against the Justice Department in a court of law.
Senator, absolutely. I mean, it's a complicated issue. It's often attempted to make this out as an easy issue, but it is a complicated issue. There are sports for which it is advantageous, right? Men should not be competing in women's gymnastics, for example. And so this is not an issue that is easy to summarize or to make sound bites over. It is complicated, which is why it is important that the Department of Justice is paying careful attention to what the law is and applying the facts to the law.
Mr. Geiser, let me just ask you about nationwide injunctions for a moment, and about the proliferation of nationwide injunctions. We have seen them explode. They're first used in the 1960s. Then they're almost never used. Of course, the nationwide injunctions, when you have one individual district court that purports to bind not just the parties before the court, but purports to impose its policy, its ruling, its order on the entire country, including parties not before the court at all, parties well outside the court's geographic jurisdiction or otherwise. Tell us about the importance of reining in the district courts to their proper constitutional role, which does not allow any individual district court to sit in the place of the Supreme Court and make policy for the nation. Tell us about the importance of this.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Hawley. And as you're aware, district courts are charged with adjudicating cases and controversies. And the Supreme Court of the United States has said that that task looks to the relief sought by the parties, and its equitable authority extends to the amount of relief necessary to redress those particular injuries. And as you are also aware, the Supreme Court is currently now considering some litigation involving that, so it would be inappropriate for me to comment on the specifics of that. But I agree with you that Article 3 imposes genuine limits and authorities for district courts, and it's in the text on the judicial power.
Setting aside the litigation currently before the Supreme Court, do you think that it is appropriate and maybe necessary for Congress to use our Article 1 authority to make clear that an individual district court does not have the constitutional authority to bind parties that are not before it or otherwise not within its jurisdiction? I mean, is that something that we Congress ought to consider doing?
Senator, I agree that Congress has an important role in setting the jurisdiction of the inferior courts that Congress creates. Those are the creature of this and the House's work. And so I think this body has an important role to play and could make a significant contribution to justice being done, as opposed to what I think millions of Americans are alarmed to see, which is the weaponization of the entire justice system to oppose the agenda that they enacted by voting for elected representatives like President Trump.
Well, I think we are looking at something that is very much a constitutional crisis, that is a growing crisis, and it is a crisis of district court judges that are way outside the bounds of the Constitution, that are seizing power that absolutely does not belong to them. And you're right, Article 1 does give us the authority to establish those courts in the first instance, to govern those courts. And in this case, I think it's time for this body to take action to ensure that those courts stay within their proper constitutional bounds. Senator Cruz, I could go on for another 15 minutes, but if you'd like to ask questions, I'm happy to recognize you. They're really enjoying my lengthy questions. They've been praying you would arrive. The chair recognizes Senator Cruz.
I appreciate just about the benefit to foreign students. It's a benefit to the United States, to our global competitiveness. Is that something you would agree to?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Thank you for being here. Ms. Ritchie, if I could just start with you, I just want to clarify something that you said to Senator Baldwin a moment or two ago. She asked you about OCR investigations into alleged cases of discrimination on the basis of gender identity under Title IX. And you said, I think, I'm looking at our quick transcript of your remarks. I was sitting here. I just want to make sure I heard it correctly. You said that the OCR, Department of Ed OCR, would investigate alleged cases of gender identity discrimination. Why is that?
Thank you for the question, Senator, and for the opportunity to have a detailed discussion about it. So in 2017, OCR clarified that transgender students, that students who bring allegations forth based on sexual orientation and gender identity, were protected from harassment under Title IX. Sex stereotyping, a very narrow set of cases applied to protect students on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. That was back in 2017. Following the Bostock case, OCR had to step back and determine how Bostock applied to Title IX cases. There are a lot of reasons it didn't apply, and I can walk through those because they're significant. But what OCR finally determined is that because of the holding in Bostock, that Bostock could inform OCR's evaluation of complaints that allege discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation identity to determine if they involve biological sex, which is consistent with the Bostock opinion. So what we held is that Bostock could inform a limited sect of OCR cases pertaining to different treatment, pertaining to harassment, pertaining to bullying, but we drew a hard line at universally accepting Bostock to apply to all Title IX cases. What we said is that because the Supreme Court said that biological sex was not relevant in the termination of those employees in Bostock, that we would also look at the relevance of sex in our cases. And what we determined is that sex is relevant in certain instances. Sex is relevant with regard to restrooms. Sex is relevant with regard to locker rooms. And sex is relevant with regard to athletic teams. So it was a very nuanced approach.
But sex is not gender identity. And the Bostock decision is Title VII. The Supreme Court specifically reserved the question of whether or not it applied to Title IX. Justice Gorsuch is very clear on this. Now, the Biden administration didn't heed that warning at all, as you know.
Yes, sir.
They subsequently issued guidance that attempted to rewrite Title IX completely.
Yes.
That guidance has been enjoined
Yes.
nationally by courts because it is utterly inconsistent with the text of Title IX. Indeed, as you know, it completely upends it. It reads Title IX to say that women's sports cease to exist, that a biological man, if he wants to be in a woman's sport, go for it. In a woman's locker room, fine. It's so outrageous that I think almost every court that has considered it has enjoined it.
I agree.
So, okay, I just want to be sure that you're not going to follow the Biden administration's interpretation of Title IX, surely.
No, sir. The Biden administration universally accepted Bostock and arguably exceeded, right? Went even further, I think.
Not arguably.
Than the Bostock opinion. That is not what we did under President Trump's first term, and that is not what we will do under President Trump's second term.
Good. Okay. I want to be crystal clear on this. That I think it's a very dangerous thing to start allowing this into Title IX, which is, it is a landmark statute. It is vitally important, and it has been under attack for 4 very long years, where we have seen women's sports, women's leadership opportunities, women's safety eliminated in many cases. And now, of course, one of the challenges you're going to face is you've got a host of colleges and universities who are openly defying, not just this administration, they're defying court orders. I hear a lot of talk from my friends over here on this side of the dais about the need to follow court orders. We've got a whole bunch of colleges and administrations that are defying court orders and saying, oh, we don't care. We're going to have biological men in women's sports no matter what. We're going to have biological men in women's locker rooms no matter what. Surely you're going to go after that, are you not, and protect the women on campus?
Yes, sir. The current leadership within OCR and Secretary McMahon, as you know, is prioritizing these cases, and that will not stop under my leadership if I'm fortunate enough to assume this role.
Good. And I want to be on the record to back to your regulations both in 2017 and 2020. I think you might want to rethink those. I mean, in light of subsequent jurisprudence and in light, frankly, of subsequent experience, I think you want to take a really hard look at how you're interpreting gender identity and the interface. There's some water under the bridge now, and the interface with biological sex and just how that's being used to undermine the rights of it's never the rights of men, it's always the rights of women, 100% of the time. And I think we've got to be very careful about that. My time has expired, and the chairman, I'm such a good citizen, I never go over. So I'll just submit some questions for the record for you, Dr. Schwinn, and others. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator King.
Thank you, Judge. We will start now the questioning. I will lead us off. Mr. Bluestone, let me just start with you. We'll just go down the panel. You are currently a violent crimes prosecutor in the United States Attorney's Office in the Eastern District. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do, the kinds of cases that you prosecute, and what you've learned from that experience.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Being an AUSA in the Eastern District of Missouri has been probably the most fulfilling job that I've had. It was commended to me by Judge Grunder. And frankly, before I clerked for him, it was not something that was really on my radar. But as both of my home state senators are aware, there has been a violent crime epidemic in the city of St. Louis, in particular, and the area surrounding it. And it has been so gratifying to be able to do something about that. I prosecuted carjacking offenses, armed robberies, other gun crimes, drug crimes, have been involved in white-collar investigations as well, and the work is extremely rewarding. I will say I fully appreciate the importance of every single case that would come before my court if I were so fortunate to be confirmed. Having seen probably north of 100 cases myself, it's incredibly significant to the defendants who would be appearing before me, the victims, their families, law enforcement who were involved. And I take that responsibility very seriously now, and I would then too. I would also note that in addition to being a violent crimes prosecutor, I also serve as our district's appellate chief. So I handle my own cases certainly, but also am responsible for overseeing every appeal, both civil and criminal, that comes through our office.
Is it safe to say, Mr. Bluestone, given your experience as a federal prosecutor, the volume of cases that you've seen and handled, that you know your way around a courtroom?
I would like to think so. Senator.
We would like to think so too.
Supervised more than 1,000 cases, and as I mentioned, handled more than 100 of my own.
Fantastic. Mr. Devine, let's talk a little bit about your experience. You are the Solicitor General of the state of Missouri. If you had to ballpark it, this may be tough, but if you had to ballpark it, how many cases would you say that you have litigated? Just in your role as a Solicitor General. You were Deputy Solicitor General for several years, but let's just leave that to one side. just as SG, how many cases did you get?
I mean, it would be impossible to know. It's in the hundreds of cases that I have supervised or personally litigated myself. As Solicitor General, I oversee the appeals for 200 attorneys in the office. We're getting a lot of appeals that are coming through that we're supervising on a daily basis. I also have a second job, not just Solicitor General, but also the Director of Special Litigation. And so I'm in charge of the unit, the trial unit, that is tasked with taking some of the most complicated matters that the state of Missouri is dealing with and taking those matters to court, to trial court especially.
So in these dual roles, you have represented the state of Missouri in trial courts.
That's right.
And in appellate courts.
That's right.
And in the state Supreme Court.
That's right.
And in the United States Supreme Court.
That's
right.
right.
You've handled some of the office's most complex matters, most complex litigation. Give us one example of a piece of complex litigation that you have handled and what you learned from it.
Yeah, I think the student loans cases that the office argued, we've now had 3 of those cases during the previous administration. Those were very, very quick cases. The administration at the time was trying to cancel hundreds of billions of dollars in student loans. We felt that that was unlawful. There wasn't any statutory basis for that. The courts ultimately agreed with us in all those cases. But it was a very, very quick moving thing, and we needed to move quickly to ensure that there wasn't permanent irreparable harm. So one thing we did in one of those cases, we actually sued before the rule had been published, which is a pretty novel thing to do, and we were able to come up with an interesting argument that ultimately prevailed in court for why we were able to do that. We showed that there is irreparable harm. $200 billion was about to go out the door, and we ultimately prevailed in that litigation.
And your success record is hard to argue with. I mentioned it in my opening statement, what you have won in judgments for the state of Missouri through the litigation you've handled totals in the hundreds of billions if you add it all up. I mean, is that correct?
That's right. I think about $700 billion.
$700 billion. That's pretty good, General Bailey. That's pretty good. Ms. Lanahan, in my expiring moments here, let me just ask you to say a word about your extensive and varied legal career. You're the principal deputy Solicitor General now for the state of Missouri. If you had to ballpark, how many cases would you guess that you have handled in trial courts, appellate courts? Put them all together. I mean, what would it be?
Certainly upwards of 50, and I have also been in charge of many of the appeals in our office. I oversee directly at least 1/4 of the appeals, and I review them before they are sent in, and I've been doing that for the last 4 years or so. And we have numerous appeals out of many groups. So that's employment law, and you have to remember that when you're doing an appeal, you're not only dealing with the trial court issues and whether what the trial court got it right, but also the appellate issues, which is a whole nother layer of separate issues on top.
Very good. Well, Judge Stevens, I wanted to ask you a whole bunch of extremely difficult questions that would have really been impossible to answer, but I'll leave that to Senator Schmidt. But first, Senator Durbin, tell us about the Title IX litigation that you carried on behalf of the state of Tennessee.
Sure. In April of 2024, the Department of Education issued a final rule interpreting Title IX, which of course bars discrimination on the basis of sex in any federally funded educational program, interpreting that language to bar discrimination on the basis of gender identity and other, quote, sex-based characteristics. And as part of that rule, which again was a rule, did not go through Congress, the Department of Education informed all federally funded educational institutions from pre-K through college that sex-separated spaces like locker rooms and bathrooms must instead be assigned by gender identity and not sex. And in similar ways, sex-separated programs like intramural sports and others fell in the ambit of that rule.
Let me just stop you right there. I want to make sure we understand the significance of this. What you're saying is that the Biden administration used an administrative process to interpret a law, a landmark law passed by Congress, Title IX, to interpret it, to require your state, and indeed every state, to allow men, biological men, into women's locker rooms, to allow men, biological men, into women's sports to allow men, biological men, into any space that a biological woman might otherwise claim under the ambit of Title IX. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so you litigated on behalf of your state to preserve. Would you say that Title IX is a landmark piece of legislation?
Absolutely.
Would you say that Title IX took years, indeed decades, to achieve?
That's correct.
Would you say that Title IX is a cornerstone of women's sports and the ability for women to have the same opportunities as men at the collegiate level and indeed every level, to have sports opportunities, athletic opportunities, leadership opportunities? I mean, is this an important statute?
It is, and for a former athlete, it hits especially close to home.
Yeah, you've lived it, have you not?
That's right.
So when the Biden administration issued a rule, not a law, not passed by this Congress, a rule that would have completely changed the meaning of Title IX, would you say that that's a pro-woman agenda?
We argued that the considerations of women were not adequately accounted for in the rulemaking process, and virtually every court to consider that rule, almost a dozen, agreed with the position Tennessee advanced on behalf of 6 states in our litigation.
Every court virtually to consider the litigation agreed with your position. Is that correct?
Including the Supreme Court in a stay application.
Including the Supreme Court of the United States. Would you say it is fair to call the effort to undermine a landmark piece of legislation for women that you yourself benefited from, that fair and equal opportunity? Would you say it's fair to call that a dark chapter in the history of this country?
I mean, certainly on behalf of Tennesseans, we thought that that rule was unlawful and inappropriate, and we were happy to succeed in the litigation against it.
Well, I just want to tell you, I'm happy you succeeded in the litigation. As the father of a 4-year-old daughter, I'm delighted that you succeeded in the litigation. And I want to thank you on behalf of her and my whole family. I want to thank you for going to battle for our daughters, for going to battle for the women you played sports with, for standing up for this landmark legislation, and for fighting it. And yes, I want to say it was indeed a dark chapter. The last 4 years have been a hellacious chapter in the Department of Justice. Those aren't your words, those are mine, to be clear, but I think it's absolutely a fact, whether we're talking about the assault on women's rights in Title IX context and others, where we're talking about the assault on religious believers. Let's not forget, this is the Department of Justice that recruited informants into Catholic parishes in this country. If that's not a dark chapter in this country's history, I don't know what the heck is. This is a Justice Department that activated the counterterrorism division against parents who went to school board meetings. If that's not a dark chapter, I don't know what is. This is a government, an administration the last 4 years that collaborated with the biggest corporations in the world to censor speech they don't like and then lied about it. If that's not a dark chapter, I don't know what is. In fact, I'd go so far to say it is the worst chapter, the worst in the history of the Department of Justice the last 4 years. Those are my views, not yours, Ms. Hermendorfer. But I will just say, when it comes to the litigation that you carried out on behalf of the state of Tennessee, I think you did a great service, not just to Tennessee, but for the nation. And I want to thank you for it. Senator Cruz.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Rogers, let me start with you. As you might know, on the 6th of May, I sent a letter to the Secretary, Ms. Chavez de Remer, on a topic that's extremely important to me and to my state, and that's illegal child labor. I relayed to the Secretary whistleblower information that I have received from an employee at Tyson Foods alleging that that individual employee had witnessed underage labor in a Tyson's plant. That same whistleblower also had information regarding other underage employees at other plants, and this is by no means an isolated incident. The New York Times even has done a comprehensive series of stories on underage illegal child labor in various poultry processing plants around the country, including Tyson Food. Now, I'll tell you why it's particularly irksome to me, because Tyson Food unceremonially closed 2 major plants in the state of Missouri after telling our workers and farmers they would remain open. They canceled contracts with our farmers, putting many of them into bankruptcy. They fired all of the workers, sending many of them into destitution. And what we learned instead is that Tyson is happy to hire and use illegal, hire is the wrong word. They're happy to use illegal child labor in their supply chains. So they're punishing Missourians, they're closing our plants, they're breaking our contracts, but they're hiring illegals and they're using child labor. So let me just ask you, are you familiar, broadly speaking, with these reports as it regards Tyson and other poultry processors?
Senator, I'm generally aware of the reports, but not the particulars that you mentioned.
Well, following my letter to the Secretary, the acting head of the department, the division that you are now nominated to fill, responded to me and said the following: protecting children against illegal child labor is one of the top priorities of the department and the Wage and Hour division. Wage and Hour investigates every actionable complaint, tip, and referral about child labor violations, takes those allegations very seriously. He went on to say that the Wage and Hour division is engaged, I'm quoting now, the Wage and Hour division is engaged in ongoing investigations of Tyson Foods and its contractors under the FLSA. So here's my question for you. Should you be confirmed, will you continue WHD's open investigation of Tyson Food?
Well, Senator, I can't comment without knowing more of the details, but I certainly commit to continue to investigate offensive child labor wherever it may be.
Okay, good. And let me just ask you a little more specifically, what actions would you anticipate taking to ensure that illegal child labor is not possible in this country in the year 2025?
Well, Senator, there's a lot of ways in which the department can focus on continuing to do, as Secretary Chavez DeRemer mentioned, to double down on enforcing against oppressive child labor. And one of those ways is to use the resources that we have and to use the data that's available to drive down where those violations are most likely, take tips such as yours, and to move forward as aggressively as possible to make sure that we can eradicate unlawful child labor in this country.
I just want to emphasize to you that this issue is of the highest importance to me. I think it is absolutely unconscionable that we have child labor being used widely by these mega corporations, and I'm particularly incensed that it has happened to the detriment of Missouri workers. I don't like being lied to, and I will tell you that the CEO of Tyson Food has lied to me, and he has lied to the people of my state. And I don't like it being lied to and then having the law broken in front of my face, flouted in front of me. As a former prosecutor, it irritates me, it rankles me, it infuriates me. And I want to see some justice here. I want to see justice for the kids who are being illegally employed. And yeah, I want some justice for the Missouri workers who were tossed out in the cold because Tyson Food has chosen to found its supply chain on illegal labor and child labor. So I just want to underscore for you that this is the highest priority for me. And if you are confirmed, I look forward to working with you on it. I can promise you, you'll hear a lot about it from me.
I look forward to that, Senator.
Great. Mr. Berry, the Biden administration in 2023 rescinded the Trump administration's previous rule on religious exemptions for federal contractors and subcontractors, as I'm sure you're aware of. The effect of that was to strip away protections that ensured that faith-based organizations didn't have to violate their consciences in order to compete for federal contracts. My question is, does DOL plan to reinstate the implementing legal requirements for that previous rule? Will you put back in place the protections?
Senator, religious liberty, including in the practice of business and contracting, is of the utmost importance under the Constitution and my personal views. That will be, I think it's a serious issue that will have to be worked into the department's larger plans for federal contractors. But
will you advocate for it?
I will absolutely support robust protections for religious liberty.
Good. Well, I see my time's expired, and I never go over my time, Mr. Chairman. That's a joke. I'm sure the other nominees are just devastated I didn't get to ask you questions, so I'll have some more questions for you for the record. Congratulations to all of you. Thanks for your willingness to serve. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blunt, Rochester.
Thank you, Chairman Cassidy.
Mr. Bovig, nice to see you. I enjoyed our conversation the other day. Congratulations on your nomination. If I could, let's turn the focus of the discussion back to the law. I want to talk to you for just a second about your approach to the interpretation of statutes, which is something that we discussed when you and I had a chance to speak earlier. When you encounter, as you will constantly on the Third Circuit, when you encounter an ambiguous statute, what's your general approach? What do you consult? What's your approach to interpreting the text? Give us a sense of how you'll tackle this. What will be a daily occurrence should you be confirmed?
So in the face of an ambiguity, Senator, I would consult the context of the operative phrase, consider the statutory structure, look at usages of similar terms by the operative legislature at the time in question, because I think that matters, as I said earlier, with respect to enforcing bicameralism and presentment, and try to garner as much as can be from those sources, those textual indications. In the event that I think that those textual considerations don't resolve the matter, philosophically, I would be inclined to exercise restraint and not insert myself or a panel of the Third Circuit, if I was confirmed, into a position of declaring what the meaning of an ambiguity is, as opposed to deferring back to the legislature on that topic.
You just used the word text or textualist about 3 or 4 times. Do you consider yourself a textualist? Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, Senator.
Let's just think about a controversy that exists among those who call themselves textualists. Some textualists say that the statute ought to be interpreted, an ambiguous phrase ought to be interpreted according to the public understanding at the time that the statute was enacted. Other textualists, self-identified textualists, say that a text meaning sometimes only becomes clear over time. So there needs to be an elapse of time. You can consider what's happened in a space of time rightly to interpret an ambiguous phrase. Both camps call themselves textualists. Where do you fit?
In the first one, Senator, I think that an interpretive methodology that allows the meaning of a statute to shift over time, potentially over the course of interpretations by different judges under different circumstances or at the whims of policy or political considerations, can be very problematic. If I were confirmed, part of my philosophy would be to do this job pursuant to the limited powers in Article 3 in a way that enhances the democratic features of the political branches. And by that, I mean focusing on the text, what it meant at the time it was put on the books, and deferring to those political branches on the other matters.
Okay, good. So I hear you to say that you reject the idea that an act's meaning can only become clear over a number of years. You think it ought to be interpreted as understood at the time it was enacted by the public, meaning at that time. Have I got that right?
Yes.
Good. Let's talk about substantive due process for just a moment. What's your understanding of that doctrine?
I think there's a basic test set forth in Supreme Court precedent that I would apply faithfully if I'm fortunate enough to be confirmed, that seeks to identify certain fundamental rights as a matter of substantive due process. That precedent, the precedent for that test, as I understand it, basically requires consideration of whether the right at issue is implicit in the concept of ordered liberty and also consistent with deep history and traditions of the Republic. There's a lot of academic writing about the merits of that test that I think for judges, particularly me, if I'm confirmed, is sort of beside the point. Because on the Third Circuit, I'd be bound by Supreme Court precedent, like the Glucksberg case, to apply that test in the context of arguments presented to me by the parties.
What is the leading Supreme Court precedent on substantive due process, to your knowledge?
I think there's several cases that lay out and address the test that I just described in the context of discussing different fundamental rights. Dobbs is one of them. I mentioned the Glucksberg case, which is an older formulation of that test.
Yeah, in fact, the Supreme Court has used different tests over time. Substantive due process has 2 branches. No, it has the incorporation branch, and then it has the fundamental rights branch. You've been describing the fundamental rights branch. The court has used different tests over the years, frankly, to describe what counts as a fundamental right. Those tests are quite divergent, if we're being honest. But this court seems to have settled on one recently, and I think you just put your finger on the decision that most recently draws these themes together, these strands together. That's the Dobbs decision. Do you regard the Dobbs decision as settled law?
Yes.
As controlling law?
That is what I mean, is that it's a binding precedent of the Supreme Court that I would be required to apply faithfully if I'm confirmed.
And so you will apply the Dobbs decision not only in the context of life and abortion, which was the immediate context, but also for its instruction on the meaning of fundamental liberties under the substantive due process head. Is that correct? Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say that a judge endeavoring to be bound by the rule of law, which is certainly what I would be trying to do, applies all relevant Supreme Court precedents in a faithful way. And that would be my mission for life if I am confirmed.
But you were, sorry, just I want to be clear on this, just on this last point. This is important because there's lots of Supreme Court precedents that conflict with one another over the years. You will apply the current and controlling precedent to the matter at hand. Is that fair to say?
Yes, without hesitation.
Which in this case you recognize to be the Dobbs case. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think Dobbs is a recent formulation of the substantive due process test that we're talking about.
That would bind you?
Of course.
Before I call on Senator Booker, Senator Moody has agreed to chair the rest of this hearing.
Congratulations to the nominees. Thank you all for being here. Ms. Carey, let me just start with you, if I could. I want to talk a little bit about some NLRB precedents and your views on them. Let's start with captive audience meetings. The NLRB decided last year, I believe it was, that captive audience meetings, these are the meetings where workers are forced to sit through mandatory sessions with the employer, often being told by the employer why they should not unionize, perhaps being threatened implicitly or explicitly. I emphasize these are mandatory meetings now, employer with employee. The NLRB decided last year that these captive audience meetings are not consistent with labor law. You've been very critical of this decision. So just explain this to me.
Thanks for the question, and I'm sorry we haven't been able to connect prior to today. I know we've missed a few opportunities, but I have been critical of that decision, and I stand by everything that I have said publicly in relation.
So you wouldn't be able to enforce it then?
My job, if confirmed, would be to enforce the National Labor Relations Board's decision.
So you've been very critical of it. You just said that you stand by it. You're not going to retract anything, but you're going to be in charge of enforcing it. Doesn't that seem like a problem to you?
It does not, because my job—
Explain that to me.
My job, if confirmed as general counsel, would be to enforce board orders. However, if cases involving those similar issues come back and are filed by charging parties at the regional level, they are investigated on a fact-by-fact basis, and we are determined that there is merit to those. There is prosecutorial discretion for the general counsel to determine whether or not and how to move that case forward. So
Yeah, that's what worries me. It's the prosecutorial discretion that worries me. You've been very vociferously, I think, it's safe to say, critical of the NLRB's standing precedent in this area, and you will have the discretion to enforce it or not, as you just said.
I understand your concern, but every general counsel prior to me has also had the same prosecutorial discretion. I am committed to enforcing the act.
They've not been as openly critical and indeed as steadfastly so as you are on what is a key part of now your enforcement responsibility.
Again, I will be committed to enforcing the act, and the act itself, which was, approved by Congress and established by Congress.
Well, your job is not to enforce the act in the first instance. Your job is to enforce what the board has decided is the controlling law. No.
But those would be separate procedures that you're describing.
Okay, so in other words, you don't see your role as enforcing what the NLRB has done in the past.
My job, if there is questions about the board order, which is not a self-enforcing action, my job would be to enforce that action in the courts.
And you're telling me you would do that despite being critical of it?
That would be my job.
Well, right, but you have discretion to do it or not. And nothing you've said so far has allayed my concerns. In fact, you're worsening them as I sit here.
Well, Senator, I think you're confusing two issues. Enforcing a board order is separate if a new case is filed in a region, and I'm able to investigate that. The hardworking field attorneys take a look at that case, determine whether or not there is merit. At that point, that is a different case. That is not the Amazon case. Standing precedent would be the Amazon case.
So my question to you is, will you enforce the precedents of the NLRB even if you disagree with them?
I will enforce the board's order, but I will utilize prosecutorial discretion where necessary and I think is appropriate.
Okay, that's not reassuring. You mentioned Amazon, so let's just talk about Amazon. They're a client of yours?
They are.
So is Apple, I think?
Correct.
Activision?
Correct.
You'll recuse yourself from any enforcement decisions or actions involving any of these people, I assume?
Yes, Senator.
When it comes to Amazon, are you familiar with Amazon's Delivery Service Partner Program?
I'm aware of it.
Amazon uses this program to operate its delivery vehicle fleet. Now, you may know drivers wear Amazon vests, they drive Amazon branded vehicles, they deliver Amazon branded packages to Amazon customers. The company controls their time schedule, their delivery, their terms of service, the terms of their employment, but the company says at the same time, actually, they're not really our employees. They're wearing their gear, they are driving their trucks, but they say, oh, these are not our employees. They say that these are, in fact, subcontractors. Now, it's hard to imagine that this actually satisfies the joint employer rule. What's your view on this?
The joint employer rule has been, for lack of better terms, one of the issues that has flip-flopped a lot in the labor and legal community generally. And, depending on what happens, and it is an incredibly fact-intensive investigation that has to take place to determine whether or not someone is a joint employer or not.
So do you think that Amazon's attempt to control every detail of its drivers' lives, schedules, deliveries, while simultaneously treating them as non-employees, you think that doesn't violate the joint employer rule?
Well, I'm not going to comment on Amazon directly or the program you've described, but I will say that any case that comes before me, if confirmed, I will take a very hard look at, because it is an incredibly fact-intensive analysis.
Yeah, it's fact-intensive, but it's more than just fact-intensive in some legal way. It really matters for the livelihood of thousands and thousands of workers.
Which is why it's incredibly important that whoever is investigating that, and if I am confirmed as general counsel, will ultimately land in my lap, that we do a really good job in making sure that we're analyzing all of the facts before us.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a lot more questions for you, Ms. Carey. I have to say, I'm pretty concerned with your record and, frankly, the answers you've given me today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members to this. My experience is that when those right-wing dark money groups show up, they always win. And I think that does not help the credibility of the court. And I thank the chairman for allowing me to go 8 seconds over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Sibelson, welcome. It's great to have you here. Congratulations on your nomination. Let me just pick up on a question that Senator Blumenthal was asking a moment ago about abortion and life issues. What standards should courts apply when reviewing state abortion laws?
The Constitution, what the court held in Dobbs was that the Constitution doesn't say anything about, does not provide a right to abortion. And as a result, Dobbs returned the issue of abortion to the people and the representatives state by state, and said essentially this is not a question for federal judges because it doesn't say it in the Constitution. It's a question for the people in the democratic process. And that is the effect of Dobbs. And as a result, the state democratic process is now the process that has control over that issue.
What about federal legislation affecting abortion?
Federal legislation affecting abortion would be subject to the same, scrutiny as other federal legislation. It has to fall within Congress's enumerated powers, first and foremost.
What's the precedent or lines of precedent that would govern any review of federal legislation related to abortion?
Well, I mean, a few lines of precedent might potentially be relevant. Whether it's legitimate commerce clause or spending clause legislation is probably the first question that comes to mind, depending on how the law is structured. And if not, whether there is some other, affirmative hook in the Constitution that provides Congress with the power to pass that law.
So you recognize Dobbs then as the controlling precedent when it comes to life questions. Is that what I'm hearing you to say?
From the Supreme Court, yes,
Yeah,
Senator.
and the Seventh Circuit or anywhere else for that matter, correct?
Absolutely.
I mean, if there's any contrary Seventh Circuit precedent, Dobbs would supersede that.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. And I would faithfully follow Dobbs.
Good. And you regard it as controlling precedent and as settled law?
Yes.
Let me ask you this. How should courts weigh the rights of medical providers who object on conscience grounds to participating in abortions?
The Supreme Court's decision in Hobby Lobby reflected the fact that employers have important religious rights to, resist the government's requirements that they provide certain forms of health care to which they object.
What about doctors?
I'm sorry, Senator, what about doctors?
Yeah, medical providers. I mean, doctors who object to participating in abortion-related procedures.
Well,
how should a court weigh those claims?
I think I should be somewhat circumspect because there is, litigation pending around the country, and so the canons of ethics preclude me from prejudging these questions too much. But I think the basic method of analysis would follow the Supreme Court's approach in Hobby Lobby, but extending it to that context.
What about pro-life sidewalk counseling outside of clinics? Is that core First Amendment speech?
Sidewalks are recognized by the Supreme Court as core, public fora where the rights to free speech are at their zenith, or at their strongest.
And there's no difference. It doesn't matter if it's an abortion clinic or something else you're saying. I mean, regardless, the fact that the sidewalk is a traditional public forum should control the analysis, whatever the facts of the case may be.
Yeah. Generally, Senator, under Supreme Court precedent, content or viewpoint-based discrimination in the context of a traditional public forum is viewed with extreme skepticism.
Very good. Let me ask you about free exercise questions. Should the free exercise clause be given the same strength and weight of other fundamental rights like free speech?
Absolutely. The free exercise clause, I believe, the very first clause in our Bill of Rights, for a reason.
So it is. How should courts evaluate claims of religious liberty when they conflict with generally applicable laws?
The Supreme Court has spoken to that recently in cases like 303 Creative, and some other, Espinoza, Fulton. And what the Supreme Court has established is that even generally applicable laws don't carry with them an exception to the First Amendment's free exercise clause. And so if the application of what looks like a generally applicable law, like let's say a funding restriction, has the effect of discriminating against people for their religious practice, then that can violate the First Amendment.
Does the Trinity Lutheran case have any bearing here, do you think?
Yes, thank you, Senator. The Trinity Lutheran case concerned, if memory serves, funding for those playground grounds. We've all seen them with kids that are made of, recycled tires.
Correct.
And there was a state program to fund playground grounds of recycled tires. And a church playground, applied for funding, and it was denied on the grounds that, we don't provide funding to church organizations. And so what the Supreme Court held in Trinity Lutheran was, no, you can't do that. If you have a general funding program, you can't discriminate against some of your recipients simply because of their religious faith.
And how does that interact with the Smith case?
The Smith case held that general laws of, I think, neutral applicability don't necessarily violate the free exercise clause, and Smith remains a precedent of the Supreme Court that I would follow. But in the last, 12-ish years, the Supreme Court has explained that Smith doesn't mean a state can effectively exempt a religious entity from a state benefit, which is what was happening in cases like Trinity Lutheran.
Yeah, last question, Mr. Chairman. I think you're Mr. Chairman now, right? Yeah, very good. Just one further question on Smith. So in the Trinity Lutheran case and the Hosanna Tabor case, the Supreme Court said, well, Smith actually is about physical acts. It's not about other things. How do you understand that? I'm not asking you to grade the court. I'm not asking you to go beyond what the court said. I'm just trying to figure out how you're a student of the law. You've worked at that court. You've litigated at that court. I'm just trying to figure out how would you as a judge, you're going to have to read these intersecting lines of cases. What does that mean to you? How do you interpret that? That distinguishing of Smith, what do you think that means? How does that cash out?
That's a tough question, Senator. I think the Supreme Court is, struggling with Smith in many of these religion cases. I think, the other thing that it said in City of Fulton against Philadelphia was that Smith didn't apply there because although there was a general policy, it was one that the city was granting exemptions to, sort of left and right. And so there are certainly exceptions to Smith that the court has recognized. But happily, there are enough of these cases that I think as a lower court judge, you can generally find one that's roughly similar to the facts before you. And that's particularly true in the last 12 or 13 years, where these cases have been uniformly protective of religious liberty. So my essential method would be one of analogy and, to see which of these Supreme Court cases is most on all fours with the case before me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I've enjoyed your answers and I think very, very cogent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all the nominees. Thank you for being here. Mr. Mayor, let me start with you. I represent the state of Missouri here in the Senate. In Missouri, in the city of St. Louis, there are 3,200 machinists, a little bit more, who are currently on strike. The overwhelming majority of these folks are Missouri residents. They're striking against your company. You're the chief labor counsel. What do you think the fair outcome to this dispute ought to be?
Thank you, Senator, and good morning. Let me start by saying I'm not here as a representative of Boeing.
But you're employed by Boeing.
Yes, sir.
How many years have you been employed by Boeing?
Just over 3 years, sir.
Mr. Mayor, is your microphone on? If so, could you pull it a little bit closer?
Sorry, my first time here. I've been with the company about 3 years.
So my question is what do you think is a fair resolution to this dispute? And we've got 3,000 plus Missourians who are currently effectively out of a job. They haven't had a significant wage increase in years. They need to be able to afford to pay rent, to put food on the table for their families, get their health care. I mean, is your company going to do right by these workers? You can understand why I've got a significant interest in this. This matters a lot for my state. It matters a lot for these workers and their families. There's a lot of people.
Certainly, Senator, I agree. It matters a lot. It matters to our hardworking employees, our hardworking the members of the IAM. I know the concept of fairness is an elusive one. What I will tell you is that the union and the company reached an agreement at the end of July. I'm not, as I said earlier, I'm not involved in that negotiation.
Well, I mean, is the concept of fairness you say is elusive? Let me ask you this. In 2024, David Calhoun, that wasn't a question, I'm just quoting you. In 2024, David Calhoun, who's your executive at the time, got $32.8 million in compensation in a year. $32.8 million. That was a 45% increase over the previous year. At that point in time, your planes were literally falling out of the sky in pieces, and you weren't paying your workers. Is that fair?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on executive compensation.
Well, you're the chief labor counsel.
I am the chief labor counsel.
Were you involved in the settling the machinist strike in Seattle, I think it was?
Yes, Senator, I was involved in that negotiation.
Okay. Do you remember what the contract was you finally gave the Seattle machinists?
I remember parts of it. I can't.
Wage increase, 38% general wage increase over 4 years, plus the option of a $12,000 one-time ratification bonus or a $7,000 ratification bonus and a $5,000 401k contribution. Does that sound roughly correct?
That sounds roughly correct.
Okay. Why wouldn't you just do that for the folks in St. Louis?
Senator, every negotiation is different.
Well, plainly so, because what you're offering to my constituents is a fraction of that, and I guess I just don't understand why. I mean, is it that what's different about the folks in Missouri?
It's not a question of difference about the folks in Missouri. It's a question about.
You just said a minute ago, fairness is elusive. I mean, it does seem to be elusive for the Missouri strikers.
Senator, fairness is a matter of what the parties ultimately agree to. Again, as I stated earlier, the union and the company reached an agreement. The union felt that the agreement that we reached at the end of July, and
which the workers didn't ratify, right?
This is all public.
So here's what you've offered. Currently, you've offered Missouri workers a wage increase that's 16% below what you offered the Seattle workers. You're offering them bonuses that are thousands of dollars below, $8,000 or $10,000 less, with far fewer other benefits. I guess I just don't understand. I mean, what's different about these Missouri workers? I mean, there's only 3,000 of them, although that's a lot of people. It was 33,000 in Seattle. I mean, how is this going to end? Are we going to get to a fair resolution here where these workers get paid on terms equal with other workers at your company across the country? Or are these folks going to be permanently replaced by non-union workers?
Senator, there was an offer on the table. The employees voted it down, as you stated.
Right. That was months ago. I'm asking about now. What's going to happen going forward?
The employees are engaging in protected activity of striking, and ultimately the parties will negotiate a deal. I don't know how it's going to end. I'm not.
I mean, do you think it would be fair for the Missouri workers to be paid what the Seattle workers are paid?
Senator, there are a number of factors that come into play with how employees are paid, and
the general.
My time has expired, Mr. Mayor. I'll have more questions for you. I have to tell you, with 3,000 plus members of residents in my state on strike, unable to work, unable to get health care, while your CEO is getting paid $30-some million, that fairness may be elusive, but that doesn't look like fairness to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's support for it, and thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Thank you for being here. Mr. Duva, if I could just start with you. I've noticed that you've been asked a number of questions about hypotheticals, about political interference. What would happen if so-and-so tried to interfere in an investigation? What would happen if you were asked to pursue politically motivated ends? What would happen if you were asked to pursue or launch a politically motivated investigation? So let me just ask you about a non-hypothetical, just to get your response, something that actually happened. Like, for example, the United States Department of Justice seeking to track the cell phones of 8 members of the United States Senate without any criminal predicate, without any notice to any senator, multiple of whom sit on this committee, including myself, without any legal process to the senator targeted whatsoever. They tracked all incoming calls to our phones, all outgoing calls to our phones, all metadata associated with the calls, including location, the duration of the calls. Does this sound appropriate to you? Does this sound like appropriate behavior for the Department of Justice to be engaged in?
Senator Hawley, I appreciate the question, and I'm noticing the panel's asking me a lot. I'm happy to share with my colleagues as we keep going in this discussion. But, sir, what I think you're talking about is issuing a grand jury subpoena for cell phone records. And in any investigation, you better have, pursuant to the Justice Manual, specific and articulable facts about why you're doing that. If you do not have that and you cannot articulate those facts under 18 U.S.C. 2703, that subpoena does not get served.
You know, the other thing that's interesting about this context, and I appreciate your answer, is that the records that they sought to track and trace and tap, the devices that they sought, are in the possession of senators pursuant to their constitutional duties. 2 U.S.C. Section 6628A specifically says that those records do not become the possession of cell phone companies. They don't become the possession of Verizon or AT&T or whomever. They are retained by the senator's office. Why? Because these devices are used pursuant to the speech and debate responsibilities of senators. Yet the Justice Department did not inform senators, did not seek from our offices these records. They went instead ex parte to the telephone companies, got the records apparently, again, with no criminal predicate that we know about, no process whatsoever. It is a grotesque violation of statutory law and also the separation of powers, particularly the speech and debate clause. Here you have an executive branch directly spying on members of the legislative branch while they are performing their constitutional duties. Let me just ask you, Mr. Duva, does this sound like something we want to normalize? I mean, is this something you'd like to see the current Justice Department doing on a regular basis? I mean, should they be tracking the cell phone records of everybody down here on the left side of the dais? Would that be a good thing for the country?
Clearly no, Senator.
Clearly no. Clearly no. I can't tell you what an outrage I think this is, and so it's just a little bit hard for me to stomach sitting here and listening to you be asked about all of these various hypotheticals. This isn't a hypothetical. This happened. It happened, and so far there have been exactly 0 repercussions for it. And I just want to say that if my colleagues are serious about stopping political weaponization of the Justice Department, why don't we start with this right here? Why don't we find out who authorized this? Why don't we find out what laws, if any, were broken? Why don't we appoint a special prosecutor to go after this and get to the bottom of it? And I will just reiterate my calls for this committee to do full oversight hearings on exactly what happened as part of this weaponization, as part of this, I think, both illegal and unconstitutional targeting of United States senators in their constitutional responsibilities. At the same time, the same Justice Department was also targeting, we now know, thanks to whistleblowers, 92 separate conservative organizations, including Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA, a campus organization. Why? I guess because it was conservative. I mean, this is the most unbelievable abuse of the Justice Department that I've not only seen in my lifetime, that I've ever read or heard about. in our country's history, because it's not one little thing, it's an entire pattern. This is the same Justice Department that sent a SWAT team to the home of a pro-life demonstrator. This is the same Justice Department and FBI that tried to recruit informants into Catholic parishes. This is the same Justice Department that targeted the chief political opponent of the then sitting president for prosecution to try to keep him off of a ballot. I mean, it is unbelievable. And I hope that my colleagues agree. I hope we can all agree. We cannot allow this to become the norm. And I hope, Mr. Duva, if you are confirmed, you will do your part in the criminal division to make sure that the resources of this powerful, powerful agency are used for good, to protect the American people, protect the rule of law, to put violent criminals away, not to prosecute the political agendas of some politician somewhere. Thanks for being
I will, Senator. Thank you.
Senator Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Could you say that again, Mr. Chairman?
You know,
I like that.
You know, I'm amazed at how quickly it went to your head.
You shouldn't be. You know me well.
Well, that's true, but I wanted to keep it on the down low so you could at least maintain the appearance of a reasonable person. But it's good to have you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Crane, in Louisiana, the state of Louisiana judges have to run for election, which I think has some unfortunate consequences. That obviously is not your creation. If you want to be a judge, you got to run. But I meant you had to do what we have to do. You had, I guess, in one of your campaigns, $1.2 million. And I know you'll get legal contributions, and that'll include from the oil and gas industry, which oftentimes, which does have litigation in front of the court. And I know that one of the controversial cases that you had to make a decision on involved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Thank you all for being here. I want to start with you, Mr. Chung, Ms. Suttenberg, and Mr. Ricard. You've all been nominated, so they put you all right together, right in the middle. You've been nominated to the D.C. Superior Court. I just want to ask you a question or two about your judicial philosophy, and I want to start by referencing a picture that maybe will come up behind me. This was maybe a photo you've seen before. It's not a pleasant one, but it did occur right here in the district. This is Edward Korestein. Edward was 19 years old when this photo was taken. This is just from July of this year. He was a government employee at the time. This is in Logan Circle here in the district. He was out one evening, I think with his girlfriend, when he was attacked. He and his female friend both were attacked by a roving band of teenagers who left him in this condition, beat him pretty badly, as you can see. He was able to get his female friend into the car and safe, and then turned and confronted the whole band of them himself. And this is the condition he was left in. Looks pretty violent to me, but when the assailants were taken before the D.C. Superior Court, the relevant judge, Judge Kendra Briggs, who I'm sad to say was reported favorably out of this committee, though over my no vote, she gave the assailants 0 prison time. 0 prison time. And what she said was the purpose of sentencing is not punishment. That's a quote, not punishment. It is rehabilitation. And apparently she thinks that allowing people who do that kind of thing to 19-year-olds, allowing them to get off without any kind of punishment is rehabilitative. That is its own interesting question. But I want to ask you first, do you agree that the purpose of sentencing is not punishment, but rehabilitation? I'd like to hear from each of you on this. I think it's an important question. Mr. Chung, let's start with you.
Thank you, Senator. My approach to sentencing is to consider the pre-sentencing report of the defendants, the witness victim impact statement, the community impact statement, any recommendations from the prosecutors and the...
But what's the purpose of sentencing in your words? What's your philosophy?
My approach to sentencing is to consider all the facts, apply the law, and to impose sentence that reflects the seriousness of the crimes.
Well, do you think that punishment is an appropriate aspect of sentencing?
That is one factor to consider within the context of the approach to sentencing.
Do you agree with Judge Biggs that the purpose of sentencing is not punishment but rehabilitation?
Your Honor, Senator, I don't
That's
have.
fine.
the-
You can say Your Honor. It's all right. I'll answer that.
I appear in court so many times that I have the reflex of
I'm just
referring to those in the honorific title. Well, Senator, I don't have all the information that Judge Briggs had in front of her. So and I need to be circumspect in my response because judicial canons counsel that as a judicial nominee, I should refrain from commenting issues that may appear before me.
Well, I'm not asking you to comment on this case. This case is over. You're not going to have this case. I'm asking you about you, and I'm not asking you about her. I'm asking you about you. I want to know what your judicial philosophy is. And my question is, would you agree that the purpose of sentencing is not punishment, but rehabilitation? That's a pretty stark, that framing is pretty stark. Not punishment, but rehabilitation. Do you think that's right?
Well, my sentencing philosophy is to impose a sentence that reflects the seriousness of the crimes and the imposed consequences that are deserved within the context of studying the facts and applying the law to the facts.
Okay, I wish you'd be a little less circumspect. Ms. Settenberg, go ahead.
Senator, I can't speak to that particular case given that, but I will say that I spent my career as a prosecutor fighting crime, and I'm certainly committed to accountability structures and judge both for juveniles and for adults. When it comes to sentencing, I think that there are important retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, rehabilitation. Given the severity of the crime, I think you have to look to what is going to serve the interest in any particular case, and there could be different goals that are depending on.
Let me ask you this. Shouldn't keeping the public safe be a major goal of sentencing?
Yes.
Shouldn't keeping violent offenders off of our streets be a goal of sentencing?
I absolutely agree. There should be.
Okay, good. Mr. Ricard, what about you?
Yes, Senator, thank you. I would follow the law of the District of Columbia, which requires considering a number of factors, including the seriousness of the offense, imposing a sentence that reflects the seriousness of the offense and the criminal history of the offender, a sentence that provides sufficient deterrence, both specific deterrence to the individual offender and general deterrence to the community, and that the third factor does consider rehabilitation, but that's just one of the three factors that has to be considered.
And last question, Mr. Chairman. And do you agree that protecting the public and getting violent offenders off the streets is an important goal of sentencing?
Yes, I think that's the deterrence that I just mentioned. Specific deterrence is making sure that someone who's committed a violent crime and is likely to do so again would not do so.
Well, I'll have some more questions for those of the rest of you on the panel. I'm sure you're very disappointed I didn't get to ask you any. Congratulations again on your nomination.
Thank you. We've had some discussion, about the necessity for independence of